We need to talk about Marineford, and you're not going to like it. Anime autopsy here, and I need you to stop calling Marineford Ace's death arc for 2 seconds, because we need to have a different conversation about what actually died there. Yes, Ace dies. Yes, it's brutal. Yes, we have all collectively trauma bonded over that one panel of Luffy screaming. This is fine. This is normal. But that framing is incomplete to the point of being a magic trick. Because when you only talk about Marineford as Ace's tragedy, you completely miss the horror show Oda is quietly running on Luffy's body and soul in the background. And I don't mean metaphorically. I mean the way the author literally draws this kid as a corpse multiple times, while the community scrolls past on Twitter to repost the same 3 "my heart can't take this" screenshots. Here's the thing. Go look at how we usually talk about Marineford. It's always the same discourse loop. People post Ace's execution, Whitebeard's final stand, the tattoo burning away. They talk about trauma, inherited will, found family. Someone drops the obligatory, "this is where Luffy lost his smile" thread, and then we move on. What almost never comes up is the fact that, panel for panel, Marineford visually treats Luffy less as a protagonist and more as a body being dragged through a war he already lost. You remember the scream? Do you remember the empty eyes after? The limp, unresponsive Luffy Jinbe is literally carrying while he gets stabbed and shot, and Luffy does nothing, reacts to nothing, because he is gone. The way Law and his crew retrieve Luffy under that white cloth at the end, posed exactly the way the manga frames actual corpses. That is not accidental composition. That is intentional storytelling. My thesis is blunt, and you're not going to enjoy it. Marineford is not just where Ace died. Marineford is where Oda quietly killed pre-time skip Luffy, and the manga has the receipts if you stop reading it through nostalgia goggles and start reading it as planned foreshadowing. Luffy's body was already a walking death flag after Impel Down, after Ivankov spells out that his survival is a miracle and his lifespan is being shaved away. By the time we hit that plaza, what you're watching is not Luffy having a bad day. You're watching a dead man walking toward his own burial. And I say this with love. I say this as someone who has spent an embarrassing amount of adult life zooming in on Marineford panels, tracing where Oda puts shadows under Luffy's eyes, comparing how he's inked next to actual corpses, while the fandom goes, "Wow, peak," and keeps scrolling. I am the pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast. You are the reasonable human being trying to enjoy your breakfast. This is not a sin. This is normal fan behavior. But listen to me. Oda put something in front of your face, and almost everyone missed it. So in this video, I'm going to drag you a little, affectionately, through the war, through Impel Down, through that moment on the execution platform, and show you why the Luffy who walks out of Marineford is not the same person who walked in. And if I'm right, then every post-war Luffy moment you think you understand. You don't. Not yet. The video you're not ready for, Luffy's death autopsy. So here's where I need you to be honest with yourself for a second. You saw the title, you saw the thumbnail, you saw Luffy already died, and your brain went, "Oh, cool, edgy clickbait. He's going to say Luffy is secretly a ghost." No, that's not this video. And because that's not this video, this thing has to be long, painfully 2 hours plus long, plus. Listen to me. If I try to do this in 20 minutes, it is clickbait. If I don't define what I mean by death, if I don't walk you panel by panel through Impel Down, Marineford, and the time skip, then I'm just another pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast and calls it foreshadowing. We need to slow down, set terms, and then build the case. Otherwise, the entire argument collapses into fandom noise. So here's the thing. The central thesis is very simple, very boring on paper, and completely insane once you sit with it. There is a meaningful sense, textual, visual, structural, in which Luffy dies at Marineford. Not his heart stops and Brook hears a yo-ho-ho. Narratively, symbolically, in the way the author frames his body, his mind, and his will. Everything after the war is best understood as a rebirth, a second incarnation of his will, the version of Luffy who can actually become Pirate King. This is not a sin. This is not me accusing Oda of cheating or retconning. This is how serious long-form storytelling works. Authors kill characters, resurrect them in theme and function, and keep the corpse on screen so you don't notice the swap. The problem is that in this community, we throw death, symbolism, and foreshadowing into one big mushy category until none of those words mean anything. So, method. I need you to know what you're signing up for. First, I'm going to build a framework. Foreshadowing, retrofitting, and what I've called pre-writing, when an author has already planned the big deaths, rebirths, and reveals before Chapter 1, and is just unveiling them out of order. Then we're going to apply that framework to Luffy's body, his mind, and his will across 3 arenas: Impel Down, Marineford, and the 2-year gap. Actual panels on screen. Actual author comments where we have them, not vibes. We're going to talk about how Ivankov literally says Luffy surviving the poison and the hormones is a miracle and comes at the cost of his lifespan, framing him as a walking dead man on borrowed time. We're going to sit with Marineford, where after Ace dies, Luffy's eyes go empty, his body goes limp, and Oda draws him as dead weight being carried through a battlefield of corpses. We're going to track how Jinbe and Law treat him as a body to retrieve, how the white cloth, the blood, the funeral framing around Ace and Whitebeard all bleed onto Luffy too. And if we don't get precise, if we don't separate Luffy literally stops breathing from Oda buries a version of Luffy so a new one can rise, then saying Luffy died at Marineford is meaningless. This video is about cleaning that up. By the time we're done, you should be able to point to the exact panel where pre-Marineford Luffy ends. And in the next section, we're going to start where every good autopsy starts, with the body. Oh, you keep saying foreshadowing, and it doesn't mean what you think, so we've got the body on the table. Now I need you to do something much harder than looking at guts and scars. I need you to stop calling every mildly interesting parallel in One Piece foreshadowing. Because as a community, we have absolutely lost control of that word. You've seen this. TikTok edit, early Luffy smiling in the rain crosscut with Gear 5, captioned, Oda foreshadowed Nika in Chapter 3. Twitter thread with 4 cropped panels and 30 skull emojis. Any reused pose, any sun in the background, any goofy grin. Peak 4D chess planning. And listen to me. This is not a sin. Being a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast is part of being a fan. This is fine. This is normal. Here's the thing. When every echo, coincidence, and recycled composition gets promoted to genius foreshadowing, you actually make it harder to see what Oda is really doing. If everything is foreshadowing, nothing is. You flatten the difference between an intentional seed the author planted on purpose and a cool accident he noticed 10 years later and decided to reuse. Generalization time. The problem is sloppy categories. Specific example. I watched someone argue that a random background gag in East Blue, a goofy sun doodled on a tavern sign, was obvious early Gear 5 foreshadowing. No interview, no stated plan. Just, well, there's a circle, and later there's a different circle, therefore Oda knew. That's not literary analysis, that's conspiracy wall energy. And again, this is not a sin. The author is allowed to improvise. The fans are allowed to overreach. But if we're going to seriously ask, did Oda already kill Luffy at Marineford, and was that planned from the start? Then we need to grow up our vocabulary. We need to stop treating every coincidence as courtroom evidence. So here's the stricter model I want you to hold. 3 buckets. First, foreshadowing in the classical sense. information intentionally planted early for a payoff the author already knows. Second, retrofitting, when the author goes back to old material and assigns it a new, cooler meaning. This is not a sin. This is how a lot of long serialization survives. And third, something Oda-specific that I'm calling pre-writing. Pre-writing is where the endgame exists before Chapter 1. The author has already decided the big deaths, the core mysteries, the Luffy already died moment. And then he writes the story out of chronological order, revealing those decisions piece by piece. The question with Marineford is, which bucket are we in? Because once you sort the panels into those categories, Marineford stops reading as a chaotic war arc, where Oda just kept escalating until he got bored. It starts reading as a carefully staged execution of Luffy's first life. And in the next section, when we open the chest cavity and look at Impel Down poison, Ivankov's hormones, and that corpse-coded Luffy Jinbe carries through the blood, you're going to see which parts were planned, which were patched, and which were written in stone before the first chapter ever dropped. My foreshadowing, retrofitting, pre-writing, the only three words that matter. So to sort that chest cavity, we need a scalpel, not vibes. We need a vocabulary. Because if every cool coincidence in one piece is foreshadowing, then nothing is. The word stops meaning anything, and we all turn into that pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast every time Oda draws a circle. So here's the thing. There are only three words that actually matter for this conversation: foreshadowing, retrofitting, and pre-writing. If you keep those categories straight, Marineford stops being this chaotic accident where Oda just kept escalating until it felt dramatic and starts reading as a very specific kind of execution. Foreshadowing first. In the strict sense, foreshadowing is when an author intentionally introduces an element because they already know the payoff they're going to deliver later. The setup exists for the sake of that future moment, not by coincidence, not because it felt cool, not because the community later decided it was deep. You put the gun on the wall in Act 1 because you have already planned the scene in Act 3 where someone pulls the trigger. That's the rule. Foreshadowing is gun on wall for a reason. Which brings us to the second category. Retrofitting is when an author takes something they wrote earlier and later assigns it new meaning or significance they hadn't fully planned at the time. You wrote a random vase on the shelf. Years later, you realize, wait, that vase could actually have been a bomb planted by the villain. So you go back, you reframe it, you build new context around it. This is not a sin. This is fine. This is normal. Most long serials live on this stuff. The bomb was not on the wall because you knew you'd detonate it. You just got very clever with old furniture. Now, pattern interrupt. There's a third thing, and it's where Oda actually lives. I'm calling it pre-writing. Pre-writing is when an author overseeds the world with modular elements, names, symbols, visual motifs, way before they need them. Not because each one has a locked-in payoff, but because the big decisions are already made and they want raw material to pull from. Instead of a neat gun and a surprise bomb, Oda fills the entire room with junk that could become a weapon later. In Chekhov terms, foreshadowing is putting the gun on the wall because you know you'll fire it. Retrofitting is deciding later that the random vase was actually a bomb. Pre-writing is cramming the stage with guns, vases, ropes, paintings, and a suspiciously detailed chandelier, then deciding 10 years in which ones become crucial and which ones just make the world feel dense. And listen to me. In weekly manga, this isn't optional. This is survival. You have brutal deadlines, editorial interference, popularity polls that can kill your favorite character, and long-term plans that keep getting stretched or compressed. Pure foreshadowing is ideal. Pure retrofitting is chaos. Pre-writing is the buffer. It's how an author can change course without breaking the illusion that everything was planned. So when we talk about Luffy already dying at Marineford, I need you to hold all three categories in your head, because some of those death signals are foreshadowed, some are retrofits, and some are pre-written time bombs Oda planted years before he decided which version of Luffy he was going to bury. Why weekly manga is not a 20-year 4D chess game. And here's where we need to stop worshipping the 4D chessboard that only exists in Reddit infographics and not in actual publishing offices. Weekly manga is a meat grinder. It is not a cozy 20-year writing retreat where Oda sits in a cabin, sipping a latte, calmly plotting Marineford on a crystal-clear whiteboard in 1997. It is 15 to 20 pages, every single week, drafting, redrawing, meetings, phone calls, emergency fixes, because an assistant smudged a panel or an editor said, "Hey, this scene isn't landing. Can we redo the whole spread by tomorrow?" Listen to me. You do not survive that schedule while also holding a perfectly detailed 20-year battle plan in your head. You survive that schedule by having a broad spine of pre-writing and then improvising, triaging, and retrofitting on the fly, so the whole thing doesn't collapse on your liver. Oda has talked about sleeping 3 hours a night, drawing until his hands give out, getting sick so often it's basically a recurring side character. That's normal for Jump. That's the system. And inside that system, editors are not passive. They're in his ear constantly. Chapter meetings. Story conferences. Readers are loving this character. Can we keep them around? Surveys dipped during this arc. Can we speed it up? Which means those giant arcs you think were etched in stone from Romance Dawn. They're negotiable. Thriller Bark was trimmed. Wano ballooned. Marineford itself is the product of sales pressure, reader hype, and editorial terror at the idea of losing momentum. This is not a sin. This is normal. This is how serialized storytelling works when your livelihood depends on a popularity poll next to Naruto and Bleach. So when fans in the community say Oda planned every single Marineford beat from day one, I need you to hear how insane that sounds from a production standpoint. If he had every panel, every death flag, every shot of Luffy's corpse face mapped out in 1997 and never meaningfully adjusted anything based on feedback or exhaustion, he's either an actual time god or he would have been in a hospital from a psychological breakdown by chapter 50. Here's the thing. That doesn't mean the foreshadowing is fake. It means the categories matter. Pre-writing gives him the big pillars. Retrofitting lets him go back to earlier material and say, "Oh, that thing I did on instinct? I can turn that into a deliberate omen." In a 20-plus year war of attrition, retrofitting isn't cheating. It's the only sane way to keep the illusion that everything was planned. So the smarter question is not, did Oda always plan for Luffy to die at Marineford? The smarter question is, how did he use foreshadowing, retrofitting, and pre-writing together so that when Luffy breaks there, it feels inevitable? Because once you see that machinery, you're going to notice that Oda starts building Luffy's death long before Ace ever steps on the scaffold. Real Foreshadowing 101. What counts and what doesn't. So, before we march into Marineford screaming foreshadowing at every dramatic panel, we need to actually agree on what that word means. Because right now, the community throws it around for everything from airtight setups to these two faces are kind of similar if you squint and turn your head sideways. Here's the thing. Foreshadowing, in the strict, boring, literary sense, is when an author intentionally plants information early because they already know the exact payoff they're walking toward. Not a vibe, not a theme, a specific future moment. The key word there is intentional. The setup exists because the author is aiming at a particular scene, twist, or consequence they've already decided on. I need you to picture a simple, non-One Piece story. Act 1. A protagonist is washing dishes. They cough. A tiny bead of blood hits the sink. They freeze, wipe it away, hide it from their partner, say nothing. Act 3. Right when they finally confess their feelings on a rooftop in the rain, they cough again. This time it's worse. They collapse. Same illness, same side of the mouth. The camera even mirrors the sync shot. That's foreshadowing. The author didn't discover the illness halfway through. They always knew this character was going down on that rooftop, so they built the coffin on page 10. Most competent storytellers do this constantly. This is not a sin. This is not genius-level 5D chess. This is basic storytelling literacy. You're supposed to seed the gun in Act 1 if you plan to fire it in Act 3. You're supposed to show the character afraid of heights before you dangle them off a cliff. If you're publishing anything longer than a TikTok caption, you probably have a few of these planned beats, whether you admit it or not. Now, buried inside that very normal process are a few criteria we're going to use later when we talk about Marineford. First, time gap. How long between the setup and the payoff? A page? A chapter? 10 arcs? Second, clarity of connection. When the payoff happens, can a reasonable reader trace it back to the earlier moment without turning into a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast? And third, necessity. Would that early detail reasonably exist if the payoff never happened? Because real foreshadowing usually wouldn't. You don't animate a whole bloody cough insert shot for no reason. Listen to me. When I say something in Marineford is foreshadowed, I'm not saying this panel kind of rhymes with that other panel. I'm saying Oda put a narrative gun on the table because he had already written the shooting in his head. That's a much stricter category than these two quotes share a noun, and it cuts out a lot of fan theory nonsense. And that standard matters, because next we're going to look at Luffy's body and mind before Marineford, and ask a very specific question. Which of those details only makes sense if Oda was already planning to kill him there? Retrofitting. The cheat code every long manga uses. So here's where we need to add a third tool to your mental toolbox, because if you walk into Marineford with only foreshadowing in your vocabulary, you're going to mislabel half of what Oda is doing. We need to talk about retrofitting. Retrofitting is simple. The author goes back, digs through their own manga, finds a panel, a gag, a throwaway line, and goes, "Oh, that, I can use that." The meaning you feel in chapter 600 is real, but it wasn't necessarily planned in chapter 60. The scene didn't change, the interpretation did. The author is assigning new significance after the fact. And listen to me, this is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is in fact how most long-running series stay alive. Early arcs are basically the author throwing spaghetti at the wall and praying something sticks. Which character do fans latch onto? Which power system actually works? Which theme keeps coming back without them forcing it? Only once they see the pattern do they start retrofitting, turning old accidents into intentional design. Here's the thing. When it's done well, you never notice. You assume it was all planned. If Oda decides years later that a random cover story pirate is secretly important to the Revolutionary Army, and then he threads that guy into a war arc, you don't scream retcon. You go, wow, peak foreshadowing. Your brain wants a 20-year master plan. It wants to believe the corkboard existed on day one. But the creator's incentives are different. An author on a weekly schedule cannot lock everything in stone from chapter 1 without going insane. They need flexibility. They need to be able to pivot when an editor says, this character is polling badly, or when a power creep problem nukes their original outline. Retrofitting is the cheat code that lets them adjust course without breaking immersion. So the community takes screenshots and builds conspiracy walls about Oda planned this from East Blue, and Oda is in his studio going, I planned the big stuff, the rest I massaged until it behaved. That gap between fan myth and creator reality is where retrofitting lives, and this is normal. This is fine. Now, why does this matter for Marineford? Because a lot of what you've been trained to call Marineford foreshadowing is actually Oda doing extremely high-level retrofitting. He looks back at earlier Luffy injuries, the D-clan mystique, that Log Town execution imagery, and he braids them into a single coherent narrative death. Pre-written endgame plus ruthless retrofit. I need you to hold that distinction in your head, because in the next stretch we're going to watch Oda turn Impel Down poison, Ivankov's hormone gamble, and Marineford's execution staging into one statement: Luffy already died here. And once I walk you through the panels, you're not going to be able to unsee the corpse he keeps drawing. Pre-writing. Oda's secret weapon that looks like prophecy. So here's where I'm going to commit a tiny academic crime in front of you. I'm going to invent a term. Pre-writing is not in your college literature textbook. Your professor is not assigning a midterm on it. I am making this category up because I need you to have a word for what Oda actually does when he's building One Piece, especially when we get to Marineford. When most fans say foreshadowing, they imagine an author who has a crystal clear 20-year plan and then surgically plants perfect hints. That's the myth. That's the galaxy brain Oda plays 12D chess meme. But here's the thing. What Oda actually does is closer to over-preparing a universe and then rummaging through his own junk drawer. Pre-writing in this video is my label for that junk drawer. Pre-writing is Oda planting a forest of possible trees before he decides which ones he's going to climb. He sketches islands, factions, D-lore, execution platforms, weird smile motifs, and visual callbacks years before he has a specific, locked-in use for each one. He names a random warlord. He doodles a hanging platform. He gives a background marine a distinctive symbol. None of that is necessarily a guaranteed future payoff. It's raw material. It's kindling. And when you stockpile that much kindling, any future fire looks intentional. That's the illusion. When Oda later walks back into his own forest and points at one tree, that execution scaffold from Logetown, that smiling at the moment of death beat, that one panel of Luffy's body completely limp in someone else's arms, and decides, okay, that's my centerpiece now. It reads as God-tier foreshadowing. It feels planned from day one, even if the exact route there was decided mid-run. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is in fact how most long-form storytelling survives beyond Volume 3. The difference is just scale. Oda's pre-writing is so aggressive, so documented, that when he retrofits or pivots, it still feels intentional. Our pattern-seeking monkey brains see Jesus in Toast. The One Piece community sees Oda planned Marineford in 1997 every time two panels rhyme. Now, connect that directly to Marineford. The execution imagery, pre-written since Logetown. The D-clan smiling in the face of death. Pre-written as a mysterious habit long before we understood it. Luffy's body being pushed past human limits with poison, hormones, and gear abuse. Pre-written as a running gag and then slowly relabeled as a death flag. When Oda finally needs a narrative death for Luffy, he doesn't invent it on the spot. He raids his own warehouse. Listen to me. That's why Marineford hits so hard. It feels inevitable. It feels destined. But what you're actually seeing is Oda weaponizing years of pre-writing. Execution platforms, body bags, D-smiles, borrowed time language, and arranging them into one statement. This boy already died. And because we need to be precise, in the next section, I'm going to start sorting Marineford scene by scene. Which beats were true foreshadowing? Which were ruthless retrofits? And which moments are Oda reaching into that pre-writing toolbox at the exact worst possible time for Luffy? When genius foreshadowing wasn't a Naruto case study. And before I start slapping Marineford panels on screen and yelling corpse, 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 we need to calibrate your foreshadowing radar somewhere safer. Somewhere you're not already emotionally invested in being right. So, Naruto, specifically, Toby equals Obito. You remember this era. Masked goofball shows up, calls himself Toby, does the "I'm so silly" routine, then suddenly he's edgy war criminal number 7. The community went feral. It's Obito. It has to be Obito. Look at the name. Look at the hair. Look at Kakashi's trauma. And then when the mask finally cracks, overnight, you get 10-minute Kishimoto's genius foreshadowing compilations. Let's actually list what fans point to. The name, Toby, Obito. Rearrange the letters. Q Galaxy Brain Edit. The mask. Single eye hole on the same side as Kakashi's Sharingan. Spiral pattern echoing that Rock Crush panel. Kakashi being weirdly haunted anytime you mention Obito. Those graveside visits. The way flashback panels of Obito's crushed body get paralleled with Toby getting crushed by boulders in fan edits. And of course the "you're late" and "those who abandon comrades" lines that people treat as 4D chess from Chapter 1. On YouTube, that all gets packaged as "Kishimoto planned this from day one, foreshadowing master, everybody clap." But here's the thing. When you actually go to the source, the story gets messier. Kishimoto has said in interviews that Toby's identity shifted during production. At various points, Toby was going to just be Madara for real, or some random new Uchiha, or a kind of Madara's will situation. The Obito answer solidified late, under the pressure of the war arc and editorial reality. The timeline of when Obito's death chapter dropped versus when Toby really starts acting serious does not scream, "This was planned a decade ago." It screams, "This author went back to his toolbox." So what actually happened? Retrofitting. Kishimoto had existing pieces on the board: Obito's heroic death, Kakashi's unresolved guilt, a mysterious masked villain who needed an identity with emotional weight. He reaches back, grabs Obito, and suddenly all those earlier, relatively generic elements get reinterpreted. The mask design becomes meaningful. Kakashi's trauma becomes set up. The rock imagery becomes proof. The past wasn't foreshadowing. The twist rewrote the past. And listen to me. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is in fact how most serialized storytelling works. You draft in public. You discover better options. You retrofit. It can still hit hard. Toby being Obito absolutely wrecked people. Thematically ties into inherited hatred and pays off Kakashi's character. Emotional power does not magically convert a retrofit into foreshadowing. I need you to sit with that difference because it's the whole problem with how our community talks about genius authors. Calling every satisfying twist foreshadowing flattens the categories we actually need. If we can't distinguish an intentional seed from a clever retrofit, we will absolutely misread what Oda is doing. So now, with Naruto as the training wheels example, we can finally go back to Marineford and start sorting. Where is Oda doing real foreshadowing? Where is he retrofitting? And where is he pulling from a pre-written endgame that makes Luffy already died a planned statement, not a coincidence? From Naruto to One Piece, why Oda plays a different game. So when we go back to Naruto with that in mind, you can see the scaffolding. Toby being Obito is a great twist. It hits. It recontextualizes Kakashi, the eye, the rock, the trauma. But once you dig into interviews, you realize Kishimoto was workshopping that identity mid-serialization. At one point, it was going to be Madara. At another, it was someone else entirely. The mask guy is Obito payoff is a retrofit draped over earlier, vaguer setup. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is in fact how most weekly manga survive. You throw out a masked man, you throw out some scars, and you decide later whose face is under there. The community then goes back, finds every panel where Obito breathes near a rock, and declares it insane foreshadowing. What they're actually praising is a very competent retrofit that stitches loose parts into a coherent twist. Now here's the thing. Oda is playing a different game. He does not build one piece around 3 or 4 nuclear twists that suddenly rearrange the board. He builds an ecosystem. Recurring motifs, recurring phrases, recurring images, the D initial, inherited will, executions interrupted by lightning, scars that mark turning points, people smiling at the moment of death. These are not random aesthetic choices. These are categories he establishes early so he can cash them in whenever he wants. And because so much of that is pre-written, when he finally spends those motifs at Marineford, it doesn't feel like a clever pivot. It feels inevitable. It feels, to your pattern-seeking monkey brain that sees Jesus in toast, like destiny. You're not watching an author scrambling to make sense of old panels. You're watching an author finally opening a sealed envelope he wrote to himself in 1997. Listen to me. This is exactly why people misread Marineford. They can feel the weight. They can feel that every D, speech, every inherited will monologue, every shot of a grinning corpse from Roger to Saul to Whitebeard is suddenly crashing down on Luffy's head. But because we only have one word in the discourse, we just shout foreshadowing and move on. We flatten pre-writing, planning and retrofitting into one blurry compliment and never ask what's actually happening on the page. I need you to see how that laziness hurts our reading. When you put on the foreshadowing/retrofitting/pre-writing lens and you apply it specifically to Luffy's body and Luffy's will, Marineford stops being the arc where Ace dies and Luffy gets trauma. It starts reading as a ritual execution the story has been orbiting for hundreds of chapters. The poison in Impel Down, Ivankov carving away his lifespan, the repeated execution imagery from Logtown onward. Those weren't random near-death gags. Those were the countdown. And once you realize that, you have to ask a much worse question. If all of that was planned, then when exactly did Oda intend for Luffy to die? Because the answer the panels give you at Marineford is not the one the community is used to saying out loud. Before the war, how Oda turned Luffy into a walking dead man. So to answer that, we need to rewind, not to Marineford, to the moment Oda quietly turned Luffy from tough shonen protagonist into biological impossibility. I need you to go back to Impel Down in your head and actually look at what the story is saying about his body. Magellan doesn't just beat Luffy, he dissolves him. The poison isn't framed as OE, big damage. It's framed as organs liquefying, nerves burning, body literally melting into a purple puddle. The guards are not going, "Wow, tough kid, he'll walk it off." They are writing him off as a corpse. The author is coding this as fatal, not in the shonen category of "he'll be fine after a nap," but in the medical category of "no, actually, you die." And then we get to Ivankov. Here's the thing. If Oda just wanted a heal, he knows how to do a heal. Chopper exists. Medicine exists. Instead, he gives you a hormone treatment that is explicitly described as a gamble and a miracle. Ivankov tells us flat out, this will shave off Luffy's lifespan, not metaphorically, intentionally. You want foreshadowing? That's foreshadowing. The cure is literally a death sentence with delayed billing. Listen to me, because this is where the community loves to hand wave. Luffy doesn't hop out of that operation room doing jumping jacks. He wakes up staggering, drenched in sweat, eyes rolling back, body collapsing every few panels. He's shivering, he's hallucinating, he's coughing up blood. And Oda keeps zooming in on that. Panel after panel of a body that should not be functioning, being puppeted forward by sheer will and plot necessity. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is intentional storytelling. Oda is reclassifying Luffy's physical state. He's not injured. He's not tired. He is a dead man burning his future to buy a few more hours in the present. Every time Ivankov says miracle, every time someone is shocked he's even standing, the manga is quietly screaming the same thing. This is not normal. Pattern interrupt. Ask yourself a very boring, very unhype question. If Oda only needed Luffy to be a little roughed up for dramatic tension at Marineford, why stack the deck this hard? Why the organs liquefying, the lifespan shaving, the miracle language, the repeated "he should already be dead" reactions from everyone in Impel Down? By the time that tiny ship launches toward Marineford, Luffy is already on borrowed time, textually, visually. The author has told you his life has been shortened, his body is in ruins, his survival is a statistical error. He is narratively a walking dead man, Ed. And once you accept that, Marineford stops being the arc where Luffy almost dies and starts being a much darker category of event. Because if he's already dead on paper when he arrives, then what actually happens to him in the war? Ivankov didn't save Luffy's life. He ended it. Because if he's already dead on paper when he arrives, then what actually happens to him in the war? Here's the thing. The story already told you the answer back in Impel Down. Ivankov doesn't save Luffy. Ivankov cashes him out. Go back to that dialogue and actually read it, not the version the community has collectively fan-patched in their heads. Ivankov spells it out. The treatment is a gamble, survival is a miracle, and the cost is Luffy's lifespan being shaved away in huge, undefined chunks. Not "you'll be tired tomorrow", not "you'll have a scar". Years. Gone. That's not flavor text. That is not a quirky RPG debuff you ignore because the protagonist has plot armor. In a story where the will of D is literally framed around how these people smile at the moment of their death, when the author pauses the pacing to have a character say, "Hey, this kid's borrowing time from his own future," you should probably highlight that in red. I need you to stop treating that speech as a tutorial pop-up and start reading it as a death certificate. And the contrast is brutal when you zoom out to other shonen. Most series hand-wave catastrophic injuries with "rested for a week" or "mystery healer did magic." This is normal. This is fine. Goku eats a senzu. Naruto gets patched by mystical slug juice. The writing shrugs and moves on because the point is the next fight. Oda, an author who absolutely could have done the same, instead gives you a multi-page medical explanation, a ticking clock, and a giant drag queen doctor saying, "In universe, this kid should not be alive." Why? Why be that meticulous about this one procedure unless it matters long term? Listen to me. That is intentional foreshadowing of a resource being spent. Ivankov's power isn't a heal. It's a trade. Luffy doesn't walk out of that room with his life saved. He walks out with his remaining years converted into fuel so he can stagger into Marineford as a dead man walking. The meter doesn't go down a little. The meter hits zero, and the story quietly flips him into overdraft. And once you read it that way, Marineford stops being the place where he almost dies and becomes the place where the bank finally starts collecting. Every time he stands back up, every gear activation on top of the hormone abuse, you're not watching a heroic second wind. You're watching interest stacking on a loan that already came due. We need to be honest about what Oda is doing in terms of storytelling categories here. This isn't random drama. This is a planned exchange. Future Pirate King Luffy purchased at the cost of original, carefree, East Blue Luffy's lifespan. The problem is that most fans only clock the emotional surface. Wow, that was intense, and miss the structural move underneath. And if Ivankov's room is the moment the clock really hits zero, then what Oda shows you at Marineford, when Luffy finally breaks, isn't a brush with death at all. It's the corpse hitting the ground. So let's walk through the panels, where Oda literally frames him as a body being carried off a battlefield, and ask, who exactly gets back up afterward? Gear second. Poison, hormones, Luffy's body as a time bomb. Because here's the thing. Marineford only feels sudden if you've been treating Luffy's body as a cartoon gag instead of a long-term horror project. Oda has been quietly wiring explosives into this kid's physiology since Eni's lobby, and Marineford is just where you finally hear the click. Go back to Gear Second. The first time you see it, it's hype, it's pink smoke, it's speed lines. But what is it in universe? Luffy manually overclocking his circulatory system. He is pumping his blood faster than any human heart is supposed to endure, turning his own body into a pressure cooker. The community turned that into a power scaling meme. Oda frames it as, "This will kill you early," in the text. That's not subtext. That's a doctor on screen going, "Hey, maybe don't microwave your arteries for fun." Then Gear Third shows up and it's the same trade in a different costume. Massive power, sure, but the cooldown is literal shrinking, his body collapsing into a chibi husk. You are watching a rubber metabolism get wrecked in real time. Every time he uses it, the manga quietly reminds you there is a cost. He's slower after, he's wheezing, he's spent. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is Oda putting a price tag on every new toy. Fast forward to Impel Down and the bill starts itemizing. Magellan's poison doesn't just hurt, it liquefies Luffy. The panels are obscene. Veins, blisters, a body that has stopped being a solid shape. Ivankov steps in terms of storytelling, does the worst possible thing. He pays the bill with a credit card. Hormones, adrenaline, miracle survival. And then, crucially, he says the quiet part out loud. Luffy's lifespan is being shaved away. Survival is now alone. Listen to me. That's not just drama. That is the author putting a countdown clock inside the protagonist. Every Gear Second, every Gear Third, every hormone boost and poison resistance goes into the same invisible ledger. We need to stop treating these as separate cool moments and start reading them as one continuous medical disaster. The category here isn't tough shonen hero. It's time bomb in a straw hat. And Oda keeps showing you the timer visually. How often is Luffy foaming at the mouth, eyes rolled back, unconscious mid-battle while someone else drags his corpse-adjacent body out of danger? Alabasta, Skypia, Eni's Lobby, Thriller Bark. Pick an arc. There is always that one panel where he stops being an agent and becomes luggage. The story literally reclassifies him from fighter to object to be carried. This is fine once or twice. This is normal for shonen. When it's every saga, that repetition is intentional. So by the time you hit Marineford, you are not watching an unexpected crash. You are watching a plane that has been flying on empty tanks, taped on wings, and one screaming engine finally run out of sky. Calling what happens to Luffy there just trauma is underselling it so hard it should be illegal. The foreshadowing has been screaming, this kid will die on his feet for hundreds of chapters, which raises the real problem and the question the next section has to answer. If Marineford is where the time bomb goes off, then who exactly is walking around in the post-war world wearing his face? Town. The first time Oda tried to kill Luffy. So if Marineford is where the time bomb goes off, we need to rewind to the first time Oda pulled the pin and then pretended nothing happened. Town. Because listen to me, that execution platform is not a gag set piece. That's Oda running a dress rehearsal for killing his protagonist. You remember the scene. Storm raging over the city, the crowd packed in beneath the scaffold, Buggy doing his best budget Roger cosplay, Luffy, hands tied, neck down, execution pose almost panel for panel, mirroring the flashback of Goldie Roger's death. He can't stretch, he can't fight, he can't run, and what does he do when Buggy's blade comes down? He smiles, thanks everyone, and accepts it. That's not oops silly cliffhanger. That's a fully staged death. Look at the composition. Oda gives you the overhead shot of the plaza, the tiny platform in the middle of a sea of faces. The camera pulled back so you feel the world watching. The executioners looming over Luffy, weapons raised, his body small and still. The next instant is pure fatalism. Luffy closes his eyes, grins, and we cut to the sky. The storm cracks open. Lightning obliterates the platform in a single divine, "Are you kidding me, Bolt?" Fate itself reaches down and says, "Not yet." Here's the thing. That's Oda building a visual language. Crowd below, D on the platform, execution pose, storm as cosmic commentary, sudden external interruption. You are watching the prototype for Marineford, except in Logetown, the universe yanks the steering wheel away at the last frame. And in that moment, Oda quietly establishes Luffy's relationship with death. He is fearless, but not because he's stupid. He's fearless because he has already made peace with dying for his dream. He smiles in the face of an unavoidable end, trusts that whatever happens is fine, and that attitude slots perfectly into the D-clan's weird habit of grinning on the gallows. Roger's smile, Rouge's sacrifice, Saul's laugh, Ace's last words. Death, for the carriers of D, is not a horror movie jump scare. It's an appointment. Now, pattern-seeking monkey time. Compare the panels. In Logetown, high angle over the plaza, execution stand dead center. Luffy framed front and center with his head bowed, then the sky split by lightning. In Marineford, overhead shots of the plaza around the execution platform, Ace and then Luffy in that same center stage, bodies limp, the storm of cannon fire and actual weather raging around them, the crowd of Marines, pirates and the watching world. Again, a D at the focal point of a public death. This is not random echo. This is not a sin. This is Oda doing pre-writing. He stages a full execution once, with fate intervening at the last instant, so that when he drags Luffy's limp body across Marineford, those same angles, that same world watching a D die energy, hit your brain on a deeper channel. The Logetown scene isn't strict foreshadowing of a specific plot beat. It's the author testing and refining the grammar of Luffy's death scene. And once he's confident that grammar works, he cashes it in at Marineford. Except this time, the lightning doesn't save him. Which means the next thing we have to do is watch Oda finally let the axe fall, and pay attention to how often he draws Luffy as a corpse before anyone in the story admits he's dead. Whitebeard's death and Luffy's collapse. 2 funerals, 1 message. So when that axe finally falls, Oda doesn't test it on some random extra. He swings it straight through Whitebeard in front of the entire world. We need to sit in that scene for a second. Whitebeard's death is not subtle. It's a medical report stapled to a gravestone. 267 sword wounds, 152 bullet wounds, 46 cannon shots, half his face gone, and he is still standing. The narration literally pauses the war to tell you, not a single scar on his back from running away. The author underlines it 3 times and then stamps "an era has ended" across the panel in 72-point font. Here's the thing. That's not just a cool send-off. That's Oda constructing a visual category in your brain. This is what the death of an era looks like. Central figure frozen in place, body destroyed, narration zooming out to talk about history rather than tactics. The war does not continue after Whitebeard. The war enters aftermath. Now, listen to me, because this is where the community turns into a pattern-seeking monkey that sees Jesus in toast and then somehow misses the whole loaf. Put Whitebeard's death next to Luffy's collapse after Ace. Whitebeard dies standing, Luffy dies falling. But the staging, it's the same grammar. Ace's body drops, Luffy's mind snaps, and suddenly he is limp. Eyes empty, mouth slack. He does not guard, he does not scream, he does not even flinch when attacks fly. He is cargo. The battlefield treats him as a non-entity. Jinbe scoops him up the way you'd grab a fallen flag. Marines are no longer fighting Luffy. They're firing at a package being evacuated. Law's submarine surfaces, and what do we see? Bodies, white cloth, blood. Luffy is framed in that pile as one more corpse being smuggled out from under the guillotine of Marineford. Functionally, narratively, emotionally, both sequences are funerals. One has a eulogy, one has screaming. But in both, the emotional climax has passed. Ace's death is the peak. Whitebeard's speech is the peak. After that, the story shifts gears into what did this cost and what comes next. Oda closes the curtain on the old world in panel form before he ever has a character say it out loud. And this is where the foreshadowing gets aggressive. Whitebeard's death is the end of the old pirate era, the age of Rox and Roger's contemporaries. Luffy's breakdown is the end of pre-Marineford Luffy, the idiot optimist who thought Raw could brute force any problem and that "I'll save everyone" was a viable battle plan. That kid dies on the plaza. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is intentional planned storytelling. Oda is pairing those two deaths to sell a double transition. The world loses its pillar, and Luffy loses his old self. Whitebeard's corpse leaves a vacuum on the sea. Luffy's corpse-coded collapse leaves a vacuum inside his own story that only a reborn Pirate King candidate can fill. And I need you to notice what Oda does next, because he doesn't resurrect that old Luffy. He replaces him. The moment Luffy's eyes go empty, Oda draws a corpse. So when I say Oda replaces him, I'm not being poetic. I mean he literally draws the old Luffy as a corpse, files the paperwork, and then quietly introduces a different person in the same body. Go back to the sequence right after Ace's death. Not the scream, not the instant shock. I need you to sit in the panels after the scream dies. Luffy's pupils lose their highlights. His eyes go from chaotic, tear-filled horror to that flat, fogged-out grey Oda uses when the lights are off. His mouth hangs open, jaw slack, tongue visible, and then it just stays there. He's not clenching his teeth. He's not reacting. He's not there. Here's the thing. Oda has a very specific visual language for bodies that are no longer participating in the story. Corpses, fully unconscious people, the "we can move them but they can't move themselves" category. Blank eyes, slack jaw, limbs drawn as dead weight instead of tension lines. You've seen it 100 times. Bell mare on the ground in Kokoyashi, Koina at the bottom of the stairs, Whitebeard standing but absolutely gone, with those empty, unmoving eyes. Now put those next to Marineford Luffy in Jinbe's arms. Same dead weight, same open mouth, same hollow stare pointed at nothing. While Kizaru's beams and Akainu's magma are flying, this kid who once screamed when a bug bit him is taking direct hits and not even flinching. That's not shonen protagonist got knocked out for a bit. That's corpse staging. And Oda doubles down. The narrative stops treating Luffy as a character and starts treating him as an object. People talk around him, over him, about him. Protect Straw Hat. Get him out of here. Jinbe doesn't say, "Luffy, let's go." He hoists him the way you'd grab a body out of a burning building. Law doesn't negotiate with Luffy. He negotiates for Luffy. The story literally hands his body from one caretaker to another. Listen to me. In a series that is obsessed with will, this is not a neutral artistic choice. Luffy is technically breathing, sure. But the thing that defines him in this storytelling system, his will to move, to choose, to shout his dream into the void, that's gone. Oda draws a corpse because, from the perspective of inherited will, something fundamental has died and it is not coming back. And that's the uncomfortable question we need to sit in. If a character's heart is beating, but their will is extinguished, what is the meaningful difference from death in One Piece? In a story where D is literally framed as a flame passed down, isn't an extinguished flame just the end? This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is intentional foreshadowing of a rebirth. Because if Marineford gives you Luffy's corpse, the next problem Oda has to solve is terrifying. Who or what climbs back into that empty body? And that's where the inherited will start doing necromancy. Jinbe. Carrying a body, Marineford's quiet funeral procession. So when I say necromancy, I'm not being poetic. I'm being literal about how Oda frames the next beat. Because the very first thing we see after that mental death is Jinbe sprinting through Marineford with Luffy in his arms. And the panel composition is screaming one thing at you. This is a body run. Luffy is limp, eyes empty, mouth slack, blood everywhere. Jinbe is not carrying a protagonist. He's hauling dead weight while cannon fire, laser beams and magma fists turn the background into static. The motion lines are all on Jinbe, not on Luffy. That's important. The story is treating Luffy less as a character and more as an object that needs to be transported off the field. Listen to me, because this is where the foreshadowing gets nasty. Pay attention to how people talk around Luffy in that sequence. They're shouting about protecting him, about not letting him die. But he himself says nothing. No quips, no gear calls, no, I'm going to be king of the pirates. He is grammatically absent from his own scene. Everyone else gets verbs. Luffy is a noun. That's battlefield retrieval language, the way soldiers talk while dragging a comrade's body back to base. And Oda knows exactly what he's doing there. We need to stop pretending this author just stumbled into war imagery by accident. The visual vocabulary is straight out of real-world photos and films. The fireman's carry, the limp arms, the head lolling back. You've seen that shot in every war movie where the squad hauls the fallen guy to the helicopter. Oda just replaced the helicopter with a giant fishman doing parkour through hell. Here's the thing. That one choice quietly shifts the entire genre of the arc. Up to this point, fans are still secretly coping with a shonen question. Can Luffy pull off a miracle and win? The moment Jinbe starts running with a body, the question mutates into something way harsher. Can Luffy even survive the chapter? That's not battle hype anymore. That's survival horror. You're not waiting for a comeback. You're waiting to see if the corpse twitches. Pattern interrupt. Go back and reread those pages and cover Luffy with your hand so you only see Jinbe and the environment. What story are you reading? It's a funeral procession that forgot to stop moving. The pallbearer is sprinting. The mortars are still falling. But the emotional category is the same. Get the body home. And because Oda is a deeply planned writer, that moving funeral is not a one-off. It's rehearsal. By staging Luffy as a body in transit, he's prefiguring the submarine scene with Law, where the imagery goes full morgue. White cloth, still frame, surgeons working on what might as well be a cadaver. Jinbe's run is the wake on fast forward. Law's operating room is the burial and exhumation. I need you to clock that progression, because once you see Jinbe as the first pallbearer, every Luffy died at Marineford argument stops sounding insane and starts sounding annoyingly, extremely intentional. Law's submarine. Luffy under the white cloth. So when we cut from Jinbe's desperate sprint to Law's submarine, Oda doesn't suddenly flip into hospital drama, he'll be fine mode. He doubles down. The first clear shot we get of Luffy in that sub. He's under a white sheet. Not bandages, not a blanket. A sheet. You know exactly what category your brain files that in. Listen to me. In visual storytelling, a white cloth over a motionless body is not ambiguous. That's corpse shorthand. That's crime scene, morgue, operating theatre. You have to actively fight your own media literacy to go, no, this is just a cozy nap while some friendly pirates patch him up. Look at the environment Oda builds around that image. We're in an enclosed metal tube, underwater, cut off from sunlight, cut off from the chaos of the war. The panels go quiet. No crowd noise, no marine screaming, no giant shockwaves, just stillness, instruments, surgeons. It doesn't feel shonen. It feels clinical. It feels cold. It feels closer to an autopsy than a recovery scene. And who's presiding over this little underwater morgue? Trafalgar D. Law, Surgeon of Death, whose entire power set is literally cutting bodies apart in a surgical room. This is where we need to stop pretending that's a coincidence. Oda could have had any random ally ship scoop Luffy up and throw him in a bed with some "he's gonna make it" speech bubble. Instead, he hands Luffy's body to the death-themed doctor whose brand is the boundary between life and death. Here's the thing. That panel of Luffy under the sheet is doing double duty. On the surface, sure, it's, wow, he's in critical condition, this is bad. But compositionally, it's a morgue tableau. Horizontal body, white cloth, professionals working, enclosed, sterile-feeling space. The only thing missing is a toe tag. If another author drew that exact panel in a seinen series, fans would not hesitate to call it a corpse shot. And this is not a sin. This is not Oda going too far or accidentally overdoing the drama. This is intentional framing. Because again, he could have given you the standard shonen reassurance. Open eyes. Someone yelling that they still feel a pulse. A big on-panel confirmation that he's alive. Instead, he withholds that comfort and leans into imagery that invites you to entertain the opposite. That you are looking at a dead boy waiting for either burial or a miracle. I need you to notice how liminal this space is. The war is over, but the healing has not begun. Luffy's first life, the carefree idiot who charges into Eni's lobby and Impel Down without ever really paying a cost, is on that table. Post-Marineford Luffy, the one defined by trauma, scars, and inherited will, is not back yet. The submarine is the chrysalis, or, if you want to be cruel about it, the coffin. And once you see that room as a boundary, not a pit stop, the next time we see Luffy conscious stops being a simple recovery and starts reading as something much stranger. A second life walking around on borrowed time. Which raises the actual problem for this community. If Oda staged a morgue, when exactly did the death happen? The D-Clan. Smiling at death, living through will. So if Marineford gave us a morgue, we need to talk about the kind of people Oda keeps putting on the slab. Because the Will of D isn't just a cool middle initial, it's a death flag. It's a category of human being whose defining character trait is that they treat death the way the rest of us treat parking tickets. Annoying, inevitable, and not worth losing your smile over. Here's the thing. Every time Oda drops that D, he pairs it with two motifs. One, enemies of the gods. A lineage that pissed off the ruling order in the Void Century so badly they're still being hunted generations later. Two, the grin. The stupid, inappropriate, this is not the time to be happy grin in the face of execution. Goldie Roger, publicly executed, swords raised, the world watching. He doesn't beg, he doesn't curse the government, he smiles and throws his dream into the crowd. That's not a death scene, that's a relay race. The body stops, the will keeps sprinting. Portgas Diaz, same pattern. He dies in Marineford with a hole in his chest and a smile on his face, apologising for being born, but also quietly confirming that Roger's will and Rouge's gamble actually meant something. The community always focuses on the tragedy, but Oda draws the face, calm, accepting, D to the end. And then there's Monkey D. Luffy at Logetown, strapped to the execution platform, storm overhead, Buggy's sword about to come down. He doesn't scream. He grins. He tells them he's glad it's happening there. That's a teenager doing a perfect cosplay of Roger's last moment. And it's not an accident. It's intentional visual foreshadowing. Listen to me. Oda is telling you what DS do when death shows up. They don't negotiate. They affirm their dream and hand it off if they have to. Which brings us to inherited will. In One Piece, the author hammers this more than any power system. Dreams don't die. Purposes don't die. People die serving those things, and then someone else picks them up. Roger to Shanks to Luffy, Quina to Zoro, Oden to the Scabbards and Momonosuke. The story keeps insisting that the idea matters more than the specific meat puppet carrying it. So when a D falls, the important question isn't, did their heart stop? The important question is, where did that will go? A D can die in the biological sense, while their will gets redistributed, concentrated, even reborn in someone else's body. This is not a sin in Oda's storytelling. This is the operating system. I need you to notice what that means for Marineford. Ace's will doesn't just vanish. It slams straight into Luffy, on top of Sabo's inherited dream and Roger's original spark. Post-war Luffy isn't a clean continuity of pre-war Luffy. He's a vessel crammed with 3 generations of D-adjacent purpose that has just watched its last safety net get incinerated. And once you accept that the D-clan's real immortality is will-based, not body-based, the Luffy already died reading becomes way less edgy and way more standard One Piece. Because the question stops being, did Luffy survive Marineford, and becomes something much worse. Whose will stood up in his place? Inherited. Will versus biological life. What death means in One Piece. So we need to pause here and clean up a vocabulary problem the community has had for years. Because if you hear Luffy already died and your brain immediately jumps to his heart stopped and Oda lied to us, you're in the wrong category of death. Here's the thing. One Piece runs on 2 overlapping systems. There's biological life, where hearts beat, lungs work, bodies rot. And then there's narrative life, where a will, a dream, a purpose keeps walking around even after the body is ash. The author has been screaming this difference at us since Drum Island, and most fans just nod, cry, and then go back to power scaling. Foreshadowing for this starts with Dr. Hiruluk. He stands on that snowy cliff, already poisoned, already doomed, and delivers the thesis statement. When do you think people die? When they are shot? No. When they eat a soup made from a poisonous mushroom? No. It's when they are forgotten. Biologically, he dies in the next panels. Narratively, he's immortal. Chopper, his medicine, that Sakura flag on Drum. That's Hiruluk's will walking around in a blue-nosed reindeer. Quina is a corpse in a storage room. Oden is boiled alive. From a biological perspective, they're done. But Zoro's entire career is Quina refusing to die. The Scabbard's charge at Onigashima is Oden's dance finally cashing its check. One Piece keeps separating body death from will death, and then telling you which one actually matters. And the story is very clear. The true tragedy is not when the heart stops. It's when the dream stops. When someone abandons their purpose. When the inherited will chain snaps. That's the real funeral. The body hitting the ground is almost an afterthought. Now, listen to me. Because this is where Marineford stops being edgy headcanon and becomes standard One Piece metaphysics. At Marineford, Luffy doesn't lose hit points. He loses the thing that makes him Luffy. Ace dies in his arms, and in that moment, his will to live, his dream of saving everyone, his self-image as the guy who can protect his crew all detonate at once. He goes empty-eyed. He stops reacting to pain. He's carried more than he moves. From a will perspective, that's a corpse. That is a will death. I need you to notice what Oda does not do. He doesn't have Luffy grit his teeth and shout, "I'll get stronger." He doesn't have him swear revenge. He doesn't even have him process the loss. He just turns off. The "I will become Pirate King" engine stalls on the battlefield and there's no one in the driver's seat. Pattern interrupt. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is not Oda breaking Luffy. This is the planned payoff of that Hiruluk worldview. The body can keep twitching on inertia. The will is what lives or dies. So when I say Luffy died at Marineford, I'm not pitching some secret defibrillator scene. I'm saying Oda stages a canonical will death that the rest of the story quietly treats as a death and rebirth event. And once you accept that, you can start asking the actually scary question. If Luffy's original will flatlined there, what exactly stood up 2 years later wearing his scar? The breakdown. When Luffy stops being Luffy. So we need to go back to the ugliest, quietest page in Marineford. Not the big double spread of Ace dying, not the fire, not the speech. The page after. Luffy on his knees, hands still on Ace's body, mouth open in a scream that doesn't even get a speech bubble anymore. Then the scream just cuts. No sound effect, no inner monologue. Just that empty, glassy stare. Listen to me. Oda draws Luffy there the way he draws corpses. The pupils aren't focused. The jaw hangs. His body is slack in Jinbe's arms, while attacks are literally landing around him, and he doesn't flinch. In a manga that usually treats pain as a comedy bit, that absence of reaction is its own category of horror. Here's the thing. We've seen Luffy lose before. Crocodile literally impales him and dumps him in the sand. Lucci breaks his bones. Enies lobby has him coughing blood on the flagstones. In all those defeats, the writing does the same move. Instant counter will. I'm gonna beat him. I won't fall. Some stubborn, stupid line that tells you his core is intact, that the author is signaling, don't worry, the real Luffy is still in there. Marineford does the opposite. After Ace dies, there is no vow. No, I'll protect the rest. No, I need to get stronger. Nothing. Just a mental blue screen. The internal monologue vanishes because there is literally nobody home to monologue. For a character whose entire storytelling function is raw, externalized desire, that silence is not an aesthetic choice. It's a death certificate. Compare the panels. Crocodile defeat. Luffy lying in blood, but his eyes are burning, teeth clenched, still reaching upward. Enies lobby. He's wrecked, but he's shouting orders, demanding a path forward. Marineford. Ace in his arms, blood everywhere. Then that tiny, brutal close-up of Luffy's face going blank as the realization hits that he failed the one person he swore to protect. The self-concept that I can save my friends doesn't crack. It disintegrates. And in One Piece terms, that's not just a mood swing. That is will death. The thing that moves his rubber body, the thing that Haki is literally a metaphor for, gets annihilated. You can call it trauma. You can call it shock. Functionally, the pre-war Luffy who believed his optimism and fists were enough to keep his family safe ceases to exist on that battlefield. So when he later wakes up on Amazon Lily, screaming Ace's name and then spiraling into that I couldn't save anyone breakdown, we're not watching the same guy reboot. We're watching a new consciousness boot from corrupted save data. Different emotional baseline, different sense of responsibility. The writing shifts from I'll become Pirate King because it's fun to I have to become strong enough that this never happens again. At what point does that stop being character development and start being, in practical terms, a new person wearing the same face? And if that's true, then what exactly did Law and Jinbe drag off that battlefield? A survivor, or a body waiting to be repopulated by a different will entirely? Shanks at Marineford, passing the torch over Luffy's grave. So when Law and Jinbe haul that empty-eyed, slack-jawed Luffy off the ice, we cut away. We follow the submarine, the surgeries, the blood. But listen to me. The real wake doesn't happen in that operating room. It happens when a red-haired emperor walks onto the world's biggest graveyard and tells God's army to go home. Shanks's entrance at Marineford is staged as a hard reset on reality. Akainu is mid-murder, magma fist cocked, and then sword. Stop. Silence. The entire battlefield that has been pure noise for dozens of chapters suddenly freezes because one man showed up. Bodies everywhere. Whitebeard's corpse towering in the background. Ace's body cooling. And in the chaos behind the lines, Luffy's broken form being carried away like debris. You're supposed to feel that this is the end of something, not just a timeout. Here's the thing. Shanks doesn't come in swinging. He comes in speaking. If you're still eager to fight, then we'll be your opponents, is the surface line, but the real ritual is what follows. He declares the war over. He demands that no more lives be taken. He offers to handle the burials. That is not a hype man entrance. That is a priest closing a mass grave. The author frames him less as a new challenger and more as the officiant presiding over the end of an era. And that's where the foreshadowing brain in this community needs to wake up. This is the same man who put the hat on Luffy's head and told him, "Bring it back when you're a great pirate." That was the opening prayer. Shanks at Marineford is the closing one. I need you to see the symmetry. The person who inspired Luffy to go to sea arrives at the exact moment Luffy's first voyage collapses into absolute failure. It's as if the author is stamping the logbook. Attempt 1, terminated. When Shanks walks past Whitebeard and Ace, he's not just honoring two bodies. He's closing 3 chapters at once. Whitebeard's era, Ace's life, and the naive version of Luffy who thought he could sprint through paradise, crash Impel Down, and freelance a Yonko war on raw enthusiasm and rubber bones. Shanks's role here is almost administrative. He files the paperwork on that version of the story. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is intentional category work. The end of Fun Adventure Luffy, the beginning of future Pirate King Luffy. Notice how little victory language exists in these pages. No one is celebrating. The Marines are too stunned to cheer. The pirates are too gutted to gloat. The war's end is framed as a funeral, not a windscreen. Whitebeard, Ace, and pre-Marineford Luffy all get buried in the same narrative grave, and Shanks is the one shoveling the dirt, which raises a problem we need to sit with. If Shanks is closing the ceremony here, who exactly is Oda introducing when Luffy finally wakes up again? Amazon Lily, waking up after your own funeral. On Amazon Lily, Oda answers that question in the worst way possible. He has Luffy wake up from his own funeral. You remember this pattern. Luffy wakes up in a hospital bed, bandaged to hell, and the first words out of his mouth are usually about meat. He's goofy, he's hungry, he's already emotionally onto the next adventure. That's the established category. Injury equals nap, nap equals reset. This is normal. This is fine. But Amazon Lily breaks that pattern so hard it may as well press a buster call on it. Luffy comes to, checks his body, and then the memories slam in. Ace is back, the magma fist. The hole. Oda doesn't ease you in. He jump cuts straight into flashbacks and then into those screams. Not shonen protagonist angst screams. Animal, wordless, throat-shredding howls that go on for pages. His body has been patched up, but his will has not respawned with it. Here's the thing. That tonal shift is intentional. Oda is telling you, very loudly, that this is not the same recovery loop. Luffy isn't bouncing back from Crocodile or Lucci. He is curled on the ground, clawing at the dirt, sobbing so hard he can't breathe, literally begging for Ace to answer. When the girls of Amazon Lily try to restrain him, he doesn't even register them as enemies. There is no captain here. There is only raw damage. And then Jinbe walks in and refuses to let him stay dead. I need you to pay attention to Jinbe's role here, because the community massively underrates how surgical this is. Jinbe doesn't do the comforting anime mentor speech. He does grief triage. He forces Luffy to list his losses one by one. Ace, his crew, the war, everything he failed to protect. He makes him say the words out loud so the story can officially bury pre-Marineford Luffy on panel. That conversation is not pep talk, it is an autopsy. Pattern interrupt. Notice what question Oda has Jinbe ask. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "Will you get stronger?" He asks whether Luffy still wants to keep going as a pirate at all. The author is dangling the nuclear option. Do you even want to exist in this story anymore? That is not an injury recovery question. That is a post-death question. Listen to me. This sequence reads less as convalescence and more as reincarnation paperwork. Luffy has already had his Logtown execution moment. He has already been carried from Marineford as a limp body under a white cloth. Now, on a quiet jungle island, he has to consciously re-sign the contract. To choose to live on borrowed time, with a shortened lifespan, as the carrier of Ace's will and his crew's future. When he stands back up after that breakdown, scar burning across his chest, he is not back to normal. There is no normal. There is only a second life that starts here, the version of Luffy who knows he is weak, who accepts that his dream almost got everyone killed, and who will vanish for 2 years to train until he's actually worthy of being the Pirate King candidate the foreshadowing promised. And once you see Amazon Lily as a post-mortem awakening, the next thing Oda does with him stops being a time-skip convenience and starts being something much darker. The grave of Ace and Whitebeard. Luffy's silent rebirth scene. So when Oda cuts from that screaming broken Luffy to the quiet hill with 2 graves and a handful of survivors, he is not just doing an epilogue, he is staging a funeral. And listen to me. The most important corpse on that hill is not Ace or Whitebeard. We get that wide shot. The wind, the sake, the massive crosses with their names carved in, the Moby Dick's flag, Luffy, Jinbe, the remnants of Whitebeard's crew, all standing there in this weird, reverent silence the series almost never allows. Luffy steps forward, puts his straw hat on Ace's grave, and for once he doesn't yell, doesn't declare a dream, doesn't pick a fight with the sky. He just bows his head and mourns. Here's the thing. His body language is wrong for the Luffy we knew. Shoulders down, jaw set, eyes shadowed. He's still crying, sure, but it's not that wild, flailing grief from Marineford. It's heavy, contained, burdened. The boy who would charge a Yonko fleet on impulse is standing still, holding himself back, and the difference is not subtle once you actually look at the panels. What's being buried here is not only Ace and Whitebeard, it's a whole category of Luffy's self. The version that believed sheer willpower, screaming louder, punching harder, would always be enough. The author is very intentionally showing you a kid who has tested that theory to destruction. He went all in on, if I care the most, I win. And the result is 2 graves and a chest scar that will never close. So when he steps away from those markers and decides, silently at first, to send that message with the newspaper, that's the pivot. I need you to notice how insane that decision is for early Luffy. 2 years. Not sailing. Not chasing One Piece. Not recruiting crewmates or picking fights. Training. Delaying the dream on purpose. That is Luffy putting his own fantasy of constant forward motion in the ground next to Ace. In storytelling terms, this is a rebirth ritual. The hat on the grave, the goodbye to the brother and the father figure, the acknowledgement of his own failure in the same breath as their deaths. We need to see this as Oda clocking out pre-Marineford Luffy and clocking in future Pirate King Luffy. Fans joke about the time skip being a power-scaling convenience. This is not a sin. This is normal coping from a community that doesn't want to admit Oda literally held a wake for the protagonist's old self. Because once he turns his back on those graves, he's walking on the bodies of 3 things. Ace, Whitebeard, and the reckless idiot who thought consequences were a suggestion. That's the second life starting. And the disturbing part is that Oda has already shown us another, much colder funeral for Luffy long before this hilltop scene. The X-shaped scar, a permanent marker of death. That colder funeral is the one Oda carves directly into Luffy's skin. Because once we time skip, the single most aggressive visual change isn't the new outfit, or the taller frame, or the slightly sharper eyes. It's that brutal X tearing across his chest. 2 intersecting trenches, courtesy of a Kainu's magma fist, slammed into a body that had already been poisoned, hormone boosted, and dragged through a war it had no business surviving. That scar is not cosmetic. That scar is a crime scene. Here's the thing. One Piece already taught you how to read scars. The story has an entire visual vocabulary for this is where a life almost ended. Zoro's closed eye is a literal blind spot born from training that probably should have killed him. Shanks's 3 claw marks are a permanent reminder that he once misjudged danger so badly it cost him an arm and almost a kid. Whitebeard's chest, covered in wounds from the front and none from the back, is a battlefield resume and a tombstone in one panel. The author is extremely intentional about this. Scars are not random accessories. They are narrative timestamps on a character's mortality. So when Akainu drives that magma through Luffy at Marineford, we're not just ticking the battle damage box. We're stamping an expiration date. Luffy's body had already broken its warranty in Impel Down. Ivankov literally says his lifespan is being shaved away. Then Marineford stacks trauma, shock, and a hole in his torso on top of that. This isn't a tough it out and drink some milk injury. This is the panel where, in any other story, the protagonist does not get back up. Listen to me. Oda knows that. And he won't let you forget it. Post-time skip. How often does the camera just coincidentally frame Luffy's chest? Serious conversations, scar in the shot. New declaration of resolve. Shirt open, X front and center. Anytime the story wants to remind you that being Pirate King is not a fun road trip, that scar quietly photobombs the scene. It's visual foreshadowing and post-mortem documentation at the same time. I need you to clock the tonal shift here. Pre-Marineford. Luffy's big scar is under his eye. A goofy, self-inflicted wound from stabbing himself to prove his courage. Post-Marineford. The dominant scar is a cross branded onto his heart by an admiral at the center of a global war. That's not a cute escalation. That's Oda telling you the carefree boy from Fuchsia Village is gone. We need to stop reading that X as cool design choice and start reading it as a gravestone etched into flesh. In other words, the person sailing now is someone who literally carries a war on his chest. The body is the same. The lifespan is shorter. The will inside has been shattered and reassembled around that wound. And if you think I'm being a pattern-seeking monkey seeing Jesus in toast, wait until you realize the story treats that scar exactly how it treats actual graves, including in one scene almost nobody talks about. Pre-verses post-Marineford Luffy, a different captain wears the hat. And here's where that scar stops being metaphor and starts being management policy. Because the guy wearing the hat before Marineford and the guy wearing it after, that's not Luffy who grew up a bit. That is a captain swap using the same body. Pre-Marineford Luffy is chaos with a smile. He's the captain who walks into Arlong Park, tells his crew, handle it, and takes a nap in the concrete because he trusts they'll win anyway. In Alabasta, he sprints off to punch Crocodile while the rest of the crew is scattered across a civil war. Skypiea, he literally falls off the island mid-arc. Thriller bark. He lets his people burn themselves out so hard that Zoro has to offer his life to Kuma because Luffy has already driven his own body into the ground. That's the leadership style. I believe in you so much, I will casually get everyone killed. This is not a sin. This is normal shonen captain behavior. Except here's the thing. After Marineford, that captain is gone. Post-time skip Luffy is still dumb, still hungry, still our rubber idiot, but watch how he actually runs the crew. At Fishman Island, when Hody declares war, Luffy doesn't just charge the plaza alone and hope. He quietly positions his crew, tells Jinbe to hold back, times his entrance for maximum impact, and only reveals Gear 3 and Haki when it matters. Punk hazard? He stops Chopper and the kids from rushing into the SAD room and personally goes to deal with Caesar because he knows what happens when he underestimates a scientist with gas and a plan. Dressrosa is even harsher. He orders Zoro and Kinemon to stay undercover, holds back Gear 4 until he's sure the civilians are clear, and lets Law shoulder the Doflamingo hatred so the crew doesn't have to. I need you to notice the inversion. Old Luffy threw himself into danger and dragged everyone with him. New Luffy throws himself into danger to keep everyone else out. Pre-war, he's the guy yelling, "Let's go!" while Usopp screams in the background. Post-war, he's grabbing Zoro's collar, telling Sanji to stay on the ship, physically stopping his crew from rushing in. That moment on Punk Hazard where he shuts down Zoro's urge to kill Monet. That's a captain who understands that every unnecessary fight is another chance to watch someone die in front of him. And he takes on burdens alone in a way that feels less heroic and more pathological. He hides how much Gear 4 drains him. He collapses in Dressrosa out of sight, not on center stage. He keeps the weight of Ace and Sabo and the Yonko balance in his own head instead of dumping it on Nami's map table. This isn't just character development in the soft, fuzzy sense the community throws around when an author remembers to give someone a flashback. This is a hard pivot in identity triggered by a death experience. Luffy 2.0 is intentionally written on the corpse of Luffy 1.0. If you marathon the series, you can feel the tonal whiplash. East Blue through Thriller Bark is a road trip with occasional funerals. Marineford Onward is a war story that sometimes remembers to be a road trip. The break is violent. The optimism is still there, but it's housed in a captain who plans around worst-case scenarios, who treats his own lifespan as currency, and who leads as if he's already a dead man spending borrowed time. And we need to talk about how Oda telegraphs that in one specific post-war scene that most fans read as cool instead of chilling. Listen to me. Once you see that scene as a funeral for pre-war Luffy, you can't unsee it. And it rewrites every funny post-time skip moment as foreshadowing of where this borrowed body is headed. Fishman Island and Punk Hazard, testing the new Luffy. So now we hit Fishman Island and Punk Hazard, and this is where a lot of the community just shrugs and goes, "Filler feeling arcs, goofy Luffy is back, this is fine." No, listen to me. These arcs are the lab results on post-Marineford Luffy's autopsy. This is Oda stress testing the corpse he just resurrected and asking, can this version of the captain walk into another Marineford without everyone dying again? Fishman Island first. On the surface, it's classic Straw Hat chaos. Luffy punching a royal, eating everything in sight, declaring war on a guy mid-sentence. You go, oh, the idiot is back. But watch what he's actually doing with Hody. He doesn't just beat the racist shark man and call it a day. He very intentionally says, in front of everyone, aim your hatred at me. That's not just a cool protagonist line. That is a man who has already watched hatred aimed at his brother, his crew, his allies, and decided consciously that any future death flags are going on his own head. And he knows the island is fragile. Pre-war Luffy would have jet Gatling'd Noah into dust and then apologized through his teeth later. Post-war Luffy is calculating oxygen, pressure, structural damage, the fact that if he goes too hard, the entire symbol of coexistence literally crushes the people he came to save. He still chooses the insane option, but the collateral damage math is on the page now. You can see the author writing a captain who understands that if he miscalculates, it's not oops, it's another ace. Then Punk Hazard walks in and Oda just underlines it twice. Luffy deciding to ally with Law is already a different category of decision-making. This is not guy with cool hat, let's vibe. This is a planned move in the new world, with Yonko on the board, where he knows that sailing solo and winging it got him a graveyard once already. He still says yes on instinct, but the instinct has been rewired by death. Look at the kids. Pre-Marineford Luffy would absolutely help them, sure, but he'd also wander off mid-rescue to punch the nearest weirdo. Here, he locks in. He rages at Caesar not just for being a bad guy, but for treating lives as disposable test data. The whole confrontation with Caesar is weirdly deliberate, separating him from the kids, coordinating with Law and Smoker, making sure the gas weapon doesn't turn the entire island into a mass casualty event. It's still chaos, but it's curated chaos. Here's the thing. On the surface, nothing's changed. He's still grinning, still starting wars over snacks, still the same rubber idiot memes love. But underneath, every big choice is running through a new filter. If someone dies here, can I live with that? That's Marineford's ghost, sitting in the captain's chair. So when fans say, time skip Luffy matured, that's too soft. Oda isn't just aging him up. He's writing a second life protagonist being put through controlled disasters to see if he'll break the same way. Fishman Island and Punk Hazard are not detours. They are Oda proving that Marineford wasn't a one-off tragedy. It was a permanent pivot in who Luffy is even allowed to be on the page. And if you think I'm overselling that, I need you to sit with what happens the first time this reborn Luffy runs into an actual Emperor of the Sea, and how the story starts flirting with his death all over again. Dressrosa, Katakuri, Wano, a Luffy who fights like he's already died. So when Luffy walks into Dressrosa and squares up to Doflamingo, this is not just another Saturday Shonen boss fight. This is Marineford Luffy with the training wheels ripped off. He's already watched an entire war fail to save one person. Now he's watching an entire country suffer because he showed up late. Here's the thing. Pre-war Luffy would have beelined for Doffy's face and called it a day. Post-Marineford Luffy keeps stopping the fight to worry about the birdcage, to yell at Gats to protect the people, to burn his gear 4-timer on holding the cage back. He is literally letting his strongest form run out so random civilians do not get sliced into confetti. That's not, I want to win. That's, I refuse to watch another ace die in front of me. He stands there, panting, defenseless, willingly taking hits and trusting the crowd to buy him time. Who does that after almost dying for overextending at Marineford? Someone who has already experienced the worst possible loss and recalibrated his risk. His own death is a rounding error now. The only number that matters is casualties. Then Oda doubles down with Katakuri. I need you to notice how fundamentally different this fight's framing is. This is not Luffy chasing fun. This is Luffy walking into a mirror maze with a guy who can literally see the future and saying, good, I need that. He gets skewered, pummeled, humiliated. He runs once, realizes what that means for his crew, and then walks back into hell on purpose. He treats Katakuri's trident through his body as data. Pain is feedback. Embarrassment is feedback. That whole Mochi arena turns into a training montage filmed in a torture chamber. He is not there just to escape whole cake. He is there to become someone who will never again kneel in front of an execution platform, watching a brother die because he was too weak. That's the crucible. That's the category shift from adventurer to future pirate king the author has been foreshadowing since Marineford broke him. And then Wano says, okay, what if we make that literal? Luffy versus Kaido is Oda writing a guy who has already died, now speedrunning the concept. He gets one shot off Onigashima. He gets thrown into the sea. He gets clubbed into the dirt so hard his heart stops. The manga draws him in pure corpse posture more than once. And then Gear 5 hits. Gear 5 is where his relationship with death goes from tragic to almost playful. He's laughing while his heartbeat sounds wrong. He treats his own body as cartoon rubber, as if the fear of breaking it evaporated back at Marineford. But under the Looney Tunes physics, the stakes are dead serious. The only thing he cannot tolerate is Wano falling the way Ace fell. In all three battles, he moves with the specific recklessness of someone whose first life already ended on that battlefield. He's not negotiating with his own mortality anymore. He's negotiating with the possibility of failing others again. And that is the one deal he will not sign. Which raises a problem the community almost never asks. If this is his second life, what exactly is Oda planning to do with his third? So was this planned? Foreshadowing verses. Retrofit in Luffy's death. So was that second life actually planned? Or are we all just pattern-seeking monkeys seeing Jesus in the Marineford rubble? I need you to sit with that for a second, because this is where the community always sprints to the extremes. Either it's Oda planned everything from chapter 1, or it's he made it all up. And here's the thing, both of those takes are boring. They're also disrespectful to how real writing works. Start with the obvious foreshadowing. Town is not an accident. Public execution platform. Luffy smiling under the blade. The lightning strike that feels less like a save and more like the universe giving him a rain check. That is intentional death imagery. Same with Gear Second. From Eni's lobby on, Oda is very clear. This power costs health. It shaves lifespan. It's framed as Luffy trading tomorrow for today. That is not a retrofit. That is a long fuse on a future death crisis. Then layer in the D-Clan death smiles. Roger, Ace, even that random flashback of people grinning at the gallows. That is a category-level motif. People with D die with a smile. You do not accidentally build that pattern. You plant it because you know, at some point, your protagonist is going to stand on that edge. Now contrast that with the hormone and lifespan language around Ivankov. The specific phrasing of miracle, borrowed time, the way Oda suddenly foregrounds the cost of survival right before Marineford. That smells much more retrofit. Not in a bad way. This is not a sin. This is how an author looks back at pre-written ideas. Luffy will face a death-level failure, and then dials the medical and corpse imagery up to 11 to make the moment land. A quick pattern interrupt. Ask yourself, did Oda know in chapter 1 that Trafalgar Law would be the one hauling Luffy's limp body under a white cloth out of Marineford? Probably not. Did he know there would be a scene where Luffy is functionally a corpse, rescued by future allies, framed as a body rather than a character? That broad beat. Much more plausible. That's the pre-writing tier. Big motifs, inherited will, romance of dying at sea, the end of an era, the idea that the Pirate King is born out of a graveyard of dreams. Those are in place from the start. He can plug Whitebeard, Ace, and pre-Marineford Luffy into that machine whenever the story reaches critical mass. So we need to stop hunting for a single answer. Some pieces are genuine foreshadowing. Town, Gear Second's cost, the D smiles. Some are retrofits, the explicit lifespan talk, the way panels stage Luffy as a corpse. Some are pre-written seeds, the era-ending deaths, the inherited will that drags him back up. Listen to me. Marineford hits as hard as it does precisely because it is all three at once. And if that's true, then the next question is brutal. What else has been sitting there, quietly waiting to be used for Luffy's actual no takebacks final death flag? Marineford as pre-written execution. Oda pulls the trigger. So what do you do with that? You've spent hundreds of chapters building this execution language, raising the axe over Luffy's neck, and you've already pulled the fake out once at Town. You can't just keep waving the guillotine around for clout. Here's the thing. Marineford is where Oda finally cashes the check. Not with a clean blade, but with a war that functions as a pre-written execution scene stretched across an entire arc. Storm over the bay, a raised platform, a crowd of elites and fodder. The whole world watching a young pirate with a D, in his name, get crushed under justice. This isn't random staging. This is the Town scaffold, scaled up to an era-ending coliseum. And he doesn't just drop Luffy in and yell, "Good luck." The war systematically strips him. Allies, separated at Sabaody. Time, already burned to the bone rushing through Impel Down. Health. Ivankov literally tells us his hormones are shaving away Luffy's lifespan. That's not a power-up, that's a receipt. By the time he hits Marineford, he's a walking dead man whose body is being run on overdrafted life force. Then Oda starts cutting away what's left. Every desperate push fails. Every second costs another piece of him. You watch the panels get more frantic, the white of the snow and the ice making the blood pop harder, and you can feel the author tightening the noose he measured back in Logetown. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is exactly what intentional planned storytelling looks like when an author has already decided where the first death has to land. And when Ace dies, that's the moment the guillotine finally drops. Luffy doesn't just fall over because he's sad. His eyes go empty. His body goes limp. He doesn't defend himself, doesn't react to attacks, has to be physically hauled away. The manga is literally drawing him as a corpse being dragged off the scaffold while the crowd keeps screaming. Jinbe clutching Luffy's body. Law's submarine emerging from beneath the bloodied sea. The white cloth. The silent panels. That is not a rescue. That is a funeral procession that happens to be moving in reverse. Whitebeard dies on the stage. Luffy dies in the audience and gets carried out. Listen to me. This is Oda finally doing what he teased at Logetown. He executes Luffy's first self, not with a blade, but with a failure he cannot bounce back from unchanged. And then he buries him, the X-shaped scar, the graveside vow in front of Ace and Whitebeard. The 2-year time skip that functions as a literal off-screen burial and resurrection. Pre-Marineford Luffy never walks back onto the page again. The captain who returns is a different category of person, which means we need to talk about what that makes post-war Luffy. A reborn heir of the D-Will, or a dead man walking on borrowed time, and what that implies for his actual final death flag. Why calling this just trauma misses the entire point. And here's where I need you to be honest with yourself for a second, because this is where a lot of the community quietly taps out. The safe, cozy reading of Marineford is, oh, that's Luffy's trauma arc. Ace dies, Luffy screams. We get the PTSD flashbacks, and boom, instant backstory seasoning for future power-ups and serious faces. This is not a sin. This is not bad reading. This is, in fact, how we're trained to process shonen. Bad thing happens, character gets sad, character gets stronger. Cause, effect, done. You put Marineford in the same mental category as, say, Naruto watching Jiraiya die, or Gohan seeing Android 16's head crushed. It's a dark moment stapled onto an otherwise continuous self. Except, listen to me, that framing is way too small for what Oda is actually doing. When you call Marineford Luffy's trauma arc, you're treating the war as a detachable sad event. A DLC of pain. Something you could, in theory, skip in a recap and still understand who Luffy is before and after. But structurally, that's not how it's written. The war is the hinge between two different versions of this character. Pre-Marineford Luffy is the idiot rubber kid who believes his will and his body are infinite. Post-Marineford Luffy is the man who has already hit the ceiling, broken through it with Ivankov's hormones, had his lifespan shaved, watched his brother die anyway, and then woke up to the fact that his will is not actually enough. If you only see trauma, you miss how aggressively Oda codes this as death. The empty eyes when Ace falls. The panel where Luffy's body goes limp. No reaction to attacks, carried by Jinbe like a corpse. Law and his crew hauling him onto the submarine under a white cloth. This isn't just, our protagonist is very sad. This is the author staging a battlefield retrieval of a body, and Oda has been seeding the metaphysics for this for years. Logetown's execution platform. the lightning bolt that miraculously saves him, the Will of D speeches, Whitebeard dying on his feet while proclaiming the next era. That's not random hype. That's a planned vocabulary of death, will, and inheritance that culminates in Marineford, where Luffy doesn't just suffer, he gets symbolically buried so inherited will can crawl back out. Here's the thing, when we flatten all of that into character development or trauma, we erase the hierarchy. The story itself is screaming at us to see. Not every change is equal. Some are mood shifts, some are growth, and some, in Oda's own language, are actual deaths. Crossing the threshold moments you do not come back from as the same narrative entity. So, if you insist Marineford is just Luffy's trauma, you're not being grounded. You're underestimating the author's intent and the stakes he set. You're reading a funeral as a therapy session. And if you misread this funeral, you're going to completely misread what Oda does when he stages Luffy's next one. Pattern-seeking monkeys, how fandom gaslights itself. Because here's the thing, once you say funeral, the pattern-seeking monkey in your brain sprints straight to the conspiracy board. We see a coffin and immediately start asking, okay, but is it a fake body? Is this a decoy funeral? Is Luffy secretly a ghost now? We are the species that sees faces in clouds, Jesus in toast, and 20-year foreshadowing in every repeated panel composition. This is normal. This is fine. This is also where the community completely loses the plot. I need you to hear this distinction. Not every recurring visual is a 4D chess signal that Oda planned in 1997 while communing with the ancient kingdom. Sometimes a low-angle shot of Luffy with his hat shadowing his eyes is just dramatic framing. When we refuse to accept that, we end up overcrediting the author with impossible levels of planning and, ironically, missing the actual documented craft he uses in his writing. Listen to me. Oda does not need secret Joy Boy possession at Marineford to make that arc work. He doesn't need a retroactive Luffy was a ghost after chapter 574 twist. Yet I can go into any comments section and find fans insisting Marineford proves Luffy is immortal. Or that Ivankov's hormones turned him into a walking corpse whose body is being puppeted by inherited will. That is not foreshadowing analysis. That is theology with extra steps. And this is not a sin. Pattern hunting is fun. I do it. You do it. We need to admit, though, that there's a difference between this is my head canon and this is what the author intentionally planned. When someone posts a panel of Luffy being carried under a white cloth and declares, "See, canonically dead," that's not uncovering a secret plan. That's seeing Jesus in toast and then writing a dissertation about the bread. The problem is that all this noise drowns out the actually interesting conversation. Instead of talking about how Oda uses pre-writing, retrofitting, and thematic repetition to build the idea that pre-Marineford Luffy dies and a different Luffy is reborn, we get stuck debating whether Trafalgar Law is technically committing necromancy. We skip over the concrete, intentional choices. Ivankov stating Luffy's lifespan is shaved away, the repeated corpse-like shots, the inherited will speeches, to chase a Joy Boy possession twist that may never exist. Pattern interrupt. What if the boring answer is better? What if the real magic is not that Oda hid a literal death certificate, but that he can stage a symbolic death so convincingly that your brain insists it must be literal? So yes, go wild connecting Marineford to Logetown, to Gear 5, to the D-Clan. Build the weird charts. But when we're talking about something as big as Luffy already died, we need to separate the fun conspiracy wall version from serious claims about authorial intent. Otherwise, we're just gaslighting ourselves and calling it foreshadowing. And if we can clear that noise out of the way for a second, we can actually look at what Oda did plan, on the page, in sequence, to kill Luffy once and bring him back as someone who can reach the end of the story. Why over-mythologizing Oda makes him look weaker, not stronger. So here's the thing. When you hear Luffy already died and your brain immediately jumps to, ah yes, Oda planned a metaphorical resurrection back in Chapter 1, truly a 4D chess god. That's the problem. That instinct, the reflex to turn every cool pattern into evidence of a 20-year script, is actually disrespecting the craft you're trying to praise. I need you to sit with that for a second, because our community has built this meme of Oda as an omniscient prophet, this author who intentionally plotted every panel before 1997. And it sounds flattering, it feels reverent, but it quietly erases the hardest part of long-form storytelling, changing course without breaking anything. It's way easier to imagine a perfect outline than to actually fix your own past chapters in real time. Real mastery over a weekly manga isn't rigid pre-planning. Real mastery is being able to take whatever you drew 10 years ago, whatever editorial mandate just landed on your desk, whatever new idea woke you up at 3 a.m., and then weave all of that together so cleanly that fans swear it had to be planned. The magic isn't he knew everything. The magic is he made it feel inevitable. Those are not the same category of skill. Marineford is the best example of this. Not because I think Oda wrote the entire war, Ace's death, the time skip, and Gear 5 in one immaculate document in 1996. But because you can see him cashing in old motifs, pushing Luffy to a literal and symbolic breaking point, and then adjusting the tone of the series going forward. Luffy's body is already a mess from Impel Down poison and Ivankov's hormone treatment. His lifespan is canonically shaved. That's a retrofit goldmine. You can either treat that as proof Oda planned a walking dead man from day one, or you can respect the move for what it is, opportunistic genius under pressure. Listen to me, admitting that some of this is retrofit does not make Oda weaker. This is not a sin. This is normal. In fact, if you've ever tried to write anything longer than a college essay, you know how brutally hard it is to go back, grab a throwaway detail, and bend it into the spine of a new arc without snapping continuity in half. When Oda turns Luffy's Marineford collapse into a symbolic death, when he later reframes his scar, his new resolve, his captaincy style as a post-war rebirth, that's not evidence of prophecy. That's evidence of a working artist doing extremely high-level improv with his own back catalogue. And we need to start appreciating that version of Oda, not the marble statue, not the meme genius who planned your favourite reaction image in 1999, but the exhausted human being grinding out 20 pages a week, making judgment calls, committing to them, then retrofitting hard when a better idea appears. You don't have to pretend he never pivots to respect him. You just have to recognize that turning those pivots into obvious foreshadowing is the real flex, which sets us up to actually talk about Marineford on its own terms, not as a prophecy fulfilled, but as the moment Oda deliberately kills one version of Luffy so another one can crawl out of the grave. How to talk about foreshadowing without sounding like a clown. So if Marineford is where Oda kills a version of Luffy, we need to be really careful about what we call that, because if every cool parallel is foreshadowing, then none of them are. The word just turns into fandom glitter we throw on any panel that makes our pattern-seeking monkey brain see Jesus in toast. So, quick recap. We've got 3 categories. Foreshadowing, planned setup for a known payoff. The author knows the shot they're going to take. The early detail exists because of that future scene. Retrofitting. You go back to an old detail and assign it new meaning after the fact. This is not a sin. This is how most long serial storytelling survives. And pre-writing, the big one, where the author has already locked in the ending and major reveals and is basically drip-feeding you pieces of a decision that's already made. Now, how do you, a citizen of the internet, talk about this without sounding unhinged in the quote tweets? Simple questions. I need you to start here. Was there any reason for this detail to exist without the later payoff? If the answer is yes, then the foreshadowing claim just got weaker. Second, do we have any evidence the author planned this? Interviews, drafts, author comments, internal consistency that would be absurd to maintain by accident. If you can't clear those 2 hurdles, maybe don't sprint straight to Oda planned Gear 5 in the womb. Here's the thing. When the answer to those questions is probably not planned, that doesn't mean it's trash. That probably means you're in retrofitting territory. The author saw an old panel, realized it rhymed with their new idea, and leaned into it. This is normal. This is fine. Turning a throwaway gag into a tragic backstory beat is a craft flex, not a confession of fraud. Pre-writing sits in the middle as the sneaky one. With Oda, a ton of Marineford is pre-writing payoff. Luffy's body being pushed past its limit by Impel Down poison and Ivankov's hormones? That's not random drama. That's Oda cashing in on a long-term decision that Luffy's lifespan is literally being spent as fuel. The Walking Dead man vibe is baked into the blueprint, even if no character turns to the camera and says, "Wow, this is foreshadowing his symbolic death in Chapter 10. Watch what happens when we label Marineford correctly. The execution imagery that mirrors Logetown. Visual foreshadowing of Luffy's death-coded moment, planned to echo earlier panels. Jinbe and Law hauling Luffy's limp body under a white cloth, eyes empty, no reaction to attacks. That's pre-writing meeting payoff. Oda already decided this is the grave pre-time skip Luffy doesn't climb out of. The inherited will speeches and Whitebeard's death framing the new era. That's retrofitting older D-mystery teases into a full theology of rebirth. Once you separate those threads, Marineford stops being, "Wow, so much foreshadowing," and turns into, "Oh, this arc is a machine built out of 3 different tools." You respect the engineering instead of worshipping the vibes, and this is what I'm asking you to bring into your own community conversations. Not as gatekeeping, not as actually, that's retrofitting, sweet summer child, but as shared vocabulary. When someone posts panels of corpse-coded Luffy and screams foreshadowing, you can say, maybe, or maybe this is Oda retrofitting the demythology onto a pre-written death scene. That's a more interesting conversation. That's a conversation with knobs and switches instead of just volume. Because once we agree on the knobs and switches, we can finally flip the big one. Did Oda foreshadow Luffy's death at Marineford? Or did he show it to us in real time, and we all missed the funeral? Rereading. Marineford. How Luffy's death changes everything. So let's actually flip that switch. I need you to reopen Marineford in your head and read it under one absurd-sounding assumption. Pre-Marineford Luffy dies there. Not medically, not no heartbeat on the monitor, but in will terms. The Luffy who set sail from Fuchsia, who punched a Sea King and smiled at execution, that kid's story ends in the war. Here's the thing. Once you accept that premise for 10 minutes, the entire series snaps into a different focus. Suddenly, East Blue through Marineford stops being the goofy rise of a future pirate king and becomes a tragedy in slow motion about a boy running on borrowed time. Ivankov literally tells you this. The hormones are a miracle. They shave his lifespan. His body is already past its natural limits. That isn't just a cool shonen power-up. That's the author stamping Walking Dead Man on his forehead and daring the community to notice. And if the first half is borrowed time, the second half becomes something else entirely. The story of a man who already paid the ultimate price once and just refused to stay buried. Post-war Luffy is not just stronger Luffy. He's scarred, quieter in key beats, more intentional as a captain. When he rings the ox bell and sends that message to his crew, it reads less as a cheeky puzzle and more as a funeral bell for who he used to be. Reread The Grave Visit with that in mind. It's not just Ace and Whitebeard's tombstone. It's Luffy standing at his own grave, at the end point of the version of himself who thought sheer will could save everyone. The breakdown on Amazon Lily, the "I couldn't save them" spiral, is not a temporary crisis. That is a will flatlining on panel. Everything after Rayleigh shows up is resuscitation. 2 years of training stop being a grind montage and turn into rehab after death. And then the near-deaths post-time skip. Suddenly they hurt more. When Luffy collapses in Dressrosa, when Katakuri leaves him bleeding in the mirror world, when Kaido one-shots him, those aren't standard shonen HP drops. Those are the universe repeatedly testing whether this reborn will actually deserve its second lease. You feel the weight of Impel Down's "this will cost you years of your life" echoing every time he hits the floor. From a pacing standpoint, this solves a problem fans pretend isn't there. Why does the pre-Marineford half feel so relentlessly upward, then slam into a wall, and the post half feels sprawling, payoff heavy, almost epilogue coded even when the plot is still escalating? Because in this reading, Oda didn't structure one long climb. He structured a rise to a death, then an aftermath, set up to a funeral, then fulfillment of a reborn will. This is not the only correct reading. This is not a sin against canon. This is normal critical reading, a lens, a category of interpretation. But once you try it, Oda's choices feel so much more deliberate, so much more planned, that you start to wonder, if Marineford is the death, where exactly does Oda show you the resurrection? Answering the obvious objections. No, Luffy isn't a zombie. So before you scroll down and type, "If Luffy died, why is he still walking around, eating meat and punching Yonko?" we need to clear something up. I am not saying Luffy is a zombie. I am not saying Gear 5 is Weekend at Bernie's with drum sound effects. I am talking about a narrative death, a will death, the moment the story treats the old person as gone, even if the body keeps paying rent. Here's the thing. One Piece itself gives you this category. Hiruluk spells it out on a snow-covered hill. When do you think people die? Not when their heart stops, but when they are forgotten. The author is literally handing you a definition where body death and story death are different events. Roger is gone, Ace is gone, and yet their will is aggressively present in the story, weaponized through other people. That's not a fan headcanon. That's the core storytelling mechanic of the D-Clan. So when I say Luffy already died, I need you to hear that in that internal vocabulary. Marineford is framed as the moment the will that carried him from East Blue to the execution platform collapses. Ace dies. Luffy's eyes go empty. His body goes limp. Attacks land on him with zero reaction. Jinbe is literally hauling him around the battlefield the way you haul a corpse out of a war zone. Then Law and his crew retrieve that body under a cloth on the submarine. The panels are screaming, "This person is gone," even while the heart is technically still on. Now, because this is the One Piece community, and we are all pattern-seeking monkeys who see Jesus in toast and Joy Boy in every silhouette, the theories immediately jump to reincarnation and secret fruit mechanics. Is Luffy literally Joy Boy reborn? Did the Nika fruit resurrect him off-screen? Is Ivankov's hormone treatment a stealth immortality surgery? This is fine. This is normal. But my argument does not need any of that. I am not asking you to believe in a hidden chapter where Luffy's soul logs out and a new one logs in. What I'm saying is way more boring and way more intentional. Oda already told you that lifespan is being shaved away in Impel Down. Ivankov calls Luffy's survival a miracle and basically stamps borrowed time on his medical chart. Then Marineford cashes that metaphorical check. The kid who rushed into Eni's lobby without a plan dies as a captain. The will that said, "I can save everyone by myself," hits its limit and breaks. If the word death there still feels too spicy to you, fine. Call it the death of Luffy's first self. Call it a total will reset. But at minimum, you have to see Marineford as more than a bad day at work. The scar, the new resolve, the way he captains after the time skip, those are not cosmetic upgrades. They're post-funeral behavior. And once you accept that Marineford is a death scene in that sense, you can start asking the only question that matters for foreshadowing. So where, exactly, does Oda show you the resurrection, and whose will is it that stands back up? B. What this says about the ending. A pirate king who's already died. So when you ask, where does Oda show you the resurrection? You're really asking, what kind of ending is he steering a dead man toward? Because if Marineford is the funeral for pre-war Luffy, then every step toward Raftel is a corpse walking toward its own legend. Here's the thing. A pirate king who's already died once is a completely different narrative weapon than a kid chasing adventure. A normal protagonist still has something to lose. They flinch at the edge of the map. But Luffy post-Marineford has already watched his dream shatter, his brother die, his own will flatline. The worst day already happened. So when he eventually stands in front of the Void Sentry, or the gods of this world, or whatever final enemy Oda has already planned in that terrifying notebook, he's not bargaining with fear anymore. He's bargaining with borrowed time. Remember Impel Down? Ivankov doesn't just patch him up. Ivankov explicitly says this is a miracle, that Luffy is shaving off his lifespan. That's the author quietly filing him under a new category. Not boy with potential, but man whose body is already overdrawn. Then Marineford cashes the check. So when fans talk about the endgame and go, will Luffy die? I need you to notice the foreshadowing answer Oda already gave. He did. The more interesting question is, what does a man who already died choose to do with the second life that isn't really his? This is where Inherited will stop being a slogan and becomes plot critical. Luffy after the war is not just Luffy. He's Roger's smile at the gallows, Ace's stubbornness, Sabo's revolutionary fire, Whitebeard's declaration about the One Piece, all stapled onto a kid whose first self failed to protect any of them. When he's lying under that white cloth on Law's ship, that's not just a body being retrieved. That's the narrative handing his shell over to everyone whose dream still needs a vessel. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is Oda doing intentional generational storytelling. So no, we don't need to over-theorize some literal phoenix fruit twist or a secret Luffy already used up his lifetimer in his chest. This is fine. This is normal. The point of Marineford's death arc isn't to set up a plot mechanic. It's to give Oda a loaded emotional gun for the finale. Anytime Luffy stands up when he shouldn't, anytime he laughs in a situation that would make a sane person fold, the community has to remember. This is a man who decided once already that his life belonged to other people's dreams. And if the story opened on a boy who hadn't died yet and ends on a pirate king who already has, what counts as an honest ending? Does he get to retire on a sunny island? Or does a walking dead man have to pay the bill he's been dodging since Marineford? Listen to me. The way Oda answers that is the thing that might reframe every Fun Gear 5 gag you're laughing at right now. Tap why this matters. Respecting the cost of Luffy's dream. So here's where this stops being a fun tinfoil hat and turns into an actual responsibility. If we accept Marineford as the death of Luffy's first self, then suddenly his dream is not a cute pirate cosplay. It is something a human being literally died for. And if you shrug that off, you're not just missing a neat foreshadowing trick. You're disrespecting the cost the story already showed you on panel. Because here's the thing, when an author kills a version of their protagonist, that's a contract. Oda planned this. He didn't stack Impel Down poison. Ivankov's your lifespan is getting shaved speech, gear stress, and then Marineford's mental collapse just so you could file it under standard shonen power-up package. That's not a category error. That's a value error. You're treating a funeral as a training arc. When you read Marineford as a true death, every goofy Luffy moment after the time skip gets heavier, not cheaper. He's not an idiot because he hasn't seen anything. He's an idiot on purpose. The guy with the X-shaped scar and the dead brother nightmare fuel is still the guy who will fight a Yonko over meat. That's not naivety. That is a chosen survival strategy. I saw the worst thing a person can see, and I am still going to laugh with my crew. I need you to feel the difference between Luffy is naturally carefree and Luffy rebuilt carefree on top of a grave. When he's goofing off with Chopper, when he's clowning around in Gear 5, you can read that as tonal whiplash, or you can read it as a man who already broke once deciding, very intentionally, that he will not steer his ship by despair. Same panels, completely different storytelling weight. Pattern interrupt. Imagine Sabaody Luffy doing Wano Luffy's gags. You'd call it immaturity. Now put those same jokes in the mouth of someone who had Ace die in his arms, who was carried out of a war zone with corpse eyes, while Jinbe and Law literally dragged his body under a cloth. That's not immaturity anymore. That's gallows humour with a straw hat on. This is why treating Marineford as just another arc where the hero gets stronger is such a problem. It flattens what Oda framed as a symbolic execution into a grindset montage. It turns the white-bearded gravestone of that war into a protein shake. This is not a sin in the sense that you're evil for enjoying the hype. This is normal for shonen fans. But we need to admit it undersells the intentional writing happening there. So no, this reading is not me trying to grimdark One Piece into some edgy tragedy where Luffy has been a ghost the whole time. This is fine. The story is still fun, still stupid, still full of jokes about meat and idiots and found family, but holding both truths at once, that Luffy is a clown and a corpse that got back up, is a way of honouring the journey Oda actually put on the page. Listen to me. If pre-Marineford Luffy died so Pirate King Luffy could be born, then every smile after that war is paid content. And once you see it that way, you start asking a much scarier question. What does a man who's already died once owe the dream he came back for? From rant to framework, what you should take away. So here's where we turn the rant into something you can actually use. We need to get our terms straight, because if you walk away from this video with only Luffy died lol in your head, I have failed you and deserve to be bonked by 1,000 SBS corners. Foreshadowing first. Foreshadowing is the planned setup. The author intentionally plants a detail early because they already know the payoff. Laboon and Brook, Sanji and the North Blue. In Marineford terms, that's all the inherited will language Oda had locked in from day one, the execution imagery from Logetown, the way D people smile at death. Those aren't accidents. Those are guns on the mantle, because the shooting is already on the schedule. Retrofitting is different. Retrofitting is when Oda goes back to an older panel and says, "Oh, that thing. Actually, that was hinting at this. This is not a sin. This is fine. This is normal." Think of some of the D-clan rhetoric getting sharpened over time, or how certain hacky visuals in Marineford get re-explained post-time skip. The core story is planned, but the texture gets upgraded, and then there's pre-writing. Listen to me. Pre-writing is the cheat code. That's Oda deciding the endgame, the D mystery, the tone of Luffy's death and rebirth before Chapter 1, then revealing those decisions out of order. Marineford isn't Oda improvising a breakdown. It's him finally cashing in a chip he's been holding since Logetown's execution stand, and maybe even earlier. Which brings us back to the core claim. In One Piece's own language of will and death, pre-Marineford Luffy dies at Marineford. The kid who charges into Impel Down, burns his lifespan with Ivankov's hormones, and staggers into the war on literal borrowed time. That body was already a walking dead man. Ace's death just finishes the job by killing his will. Post-time skip Luffy is the will that crawled out of that grave. Impel Down, Logetown, the D-Clan, Whitebeard's death. They're not random cool moments. They're the scaffolding of this reading. Logetown frames Luffy as a smiling execution victim saved by fate. Impel Down turns his lifespan into a tab that must be paid. Whitebeard dies on his feet declaring that Roger's will lives on, while Luffy lies in the snow of Marineford visually coded as a corpse. The D-Clan is the operating system that makes this man died, but his dream didn't. A feature, not a bug. Here's the thing. This framework is not just about one spicy Marineford hot take. It's a tool. It's a way to sort panels into categories: foreshadowing, retrofit, pre-written motif, instead of just screaming, Oda planned this 20 years ago, at every coincidental parallel like a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast. I need you to use it. If we as a community start asking, was this intentionally planned? Was this a retrofit? Or is this a pre-written endgame piece being revealed now? We talk about One Piece and every other long manga with way more respect for the actual craft of writing. Because once you accept that pre-Marineford Luffy is dead and his reborn will is what's steering the Sunny, the real question becomes, what do you do with future arcs? How do you watch Egghead, Elbaf, The Final War, when you're tracking which Luffy is on the page at any given moment? How to watch One Piece from now on? Yes, including the ending. So here's what you do. Not in theory, not in some galaxy brain headcanon space, but in actual panels, in actual weekly chapters, from this point on. First, I need you to go back to Marineford and the time skip transition with the Luffy already died lens turned all the way up. Don't speedrun it on 1.5 times while you fold laundry. Sit with the corpse imagery. The empty eyes when Ace falls. The way Jinbe is literally hauling Luffy's limp body through a war zone that treats him as battlefield debris, not a protagonist. Pay attention to how often the narration and the characters talk about will, not life. It's his will must not be extinguished, not his pulse must not stop. That wording is not an accident. Then roll straight into the post-war chapters and Sabaody. Track the scar, sure, but more importantly, track the behaviour. Pre-Marineford Luffy is a chaos gremlin with a ship. Post-Marineford Luffy is a captain. He delegates. He strategizes. He consciously chooses to get stronger for other people, instead of assuming the world will bend to his rubber nonsense. When Rayleigh talks about the will of the D, an inherited will, read that as a possession scene. The body that should have stayed at Marineford is now a vessel for something older. Now, here's the thing. Once you've done that reread, we need to fix how you react to new chapters. The next time Egghead drops a panel that vaguely resembles something from Drum Island, don't sprint to Twitter screaming ODA planned this from chapter 1 like a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast. Stop. Ask, is this foreshadowing, retrofit, or pre-writing? Did the author intentionally plant this early for a known payoff? Are they cleverly reusing old material and assigning new meaning? Or is this a fragment of a decision that was made decades ago finally being revealed in order? This is not a sin. Being wrong about the category is fine. This is normal. The problem is when the community pretends all three are the same and then uses that mushy soup to argue about genius versus hack. When you jump into fandom spaces, be explicit. Say, this is a fun theory built on visual rhyme, or this is a serious claim about pre-writing and here's the interview evidence. You don't have to turn every Discord into a graduate seminar, but at least label your ingredients before you dump them into the stew. If you do that, the ending of One Piece gets way more satisfying, because you'll be able to point at specific panels and go, that was seeded, that was adapted, that was Oda seeing an opportunity and dunking from the free throw line. You'll watch Luffy's dead man walking body carry inherited will all the way to Laugh Tale, and actually appreciate which parts were planned architecture and which were last-minute interior decorating. And if we're going to ride this story into the final saga together, we might as well treat it as an ongoing investigation. Because once we start applying this lens to Egghead and beyond, we run into a much scarier question. What if Luffy isn't the only character Oda quietly killed already? If you made it this far, you're my kind of sicko. So if you're still here, 2 hours deep into Did Oda Already Kill the Rubber Boy, I need you to understand something. You are not a normal One Piece fan. This is not an insult. This is a diagnosis. Because a regular healthy person taps out somewhere around, hey, Maybe Marineford is a symbolic death. You heard Jinbe carrying Luffy's limp body under a white cloth and went, "Yeah, run that corpse footage back in slow motion. This is fine. This is normal. For us." And listen to me. I am absolutely not above you in this hierarchy of sickness. I am beneath you, clawing at the floorboards. I have spent an embarrassing percentage of my adult life zooming in on panels where Luffy's eyes are blank and his mouth is hanging open, trying to decide whether Oda drew him as unconscious, catatonic, or medically dead. That's my weekend. You chose to watch me do that. This is a shared problem. Here's the thing. This channel, this weird little corner of the community, is for the people who care about the difference. The people who want to argue whether Ivankov shaving years off Luffy's lifespan is foreshadowing of an actual death, or just a vague, "he'll pay for this someday" threat. The people who will pull out chapter numbers and SBS quotes instead of reposting a cropped panel with "Trust ODA" in impact font. If your first instinct when you see Luffy and Marineford with the dead fish eyes and the limp jaw is to ask, "What category of death is this?" You're my kind of sicko. Is that a symbolic death? A psychological death? An author quietly saying, "Pre-Marineford Luffy is gone. All that's left is the guy who can become Pirate King." We need to argue about that. In detail, with examples. So here's what I need you to do. If you think I'm overstating it, if you think Luffy never truly died, drop your counter-evidence. Show me the panels where you think Oda is clearly coding it as survival, as recovery, as "nah, he's fine, stop seeing Jesus in the toast." If you're all in on the Walking Dead man since Impel Down reading, show me the exact frames where you think the author tips his hand. Ivankov's miracle speech, the cloth over the body, the empty eyes after Ace. Bring receipts. Because this theory is not a closed case. It's an ongoing investigation. I'm one pattern-seeking monkey with a microphone. You are several thousand pattern-seeking monkeys with access to way more brain cells and way more rereads. And since you've already proven you're willing to sink this much time into one stupid, intentional question about Luffy's death, I'm going to push you one step further. Hit the comments, hit the sub, hit the bell if you want to be there when we start asking the even worse question. If Luffy already died, who's next on Oda's secret kill list? Your mission. Fix fandom's foreshadowing problem. Who's next on Oda's secret kill list? Here's the thing. That question does not get solved by vibes. It gets solved by evidence, by categories, by you actually using your brain instead of retweeting the 15th "Oda planned this from chapter 1" meme your group chat goblin friend just dropped. So I need you to do something very specific for me if you made it this far. Scroll down and hit like so the algorithm knows this community actually cares about writing and not just power scaling. Then hit the comments, but do not just type "peak." Give me your favorite example of real foreshadowing, obvious retrofitting, or Oda-style pre-writing in one piece. One example, one category. Tell me which box it goes in and why. Was it Laboon and Brook, which is pure intentional setup? Was it Scipia's mantra turning into Haki, which is a beautiful retrofit? Was it Nika imagery from pre-time skip that only makes sense if the author had already planned Gear 5? We need to train this muscle. We need to be the pattern-seeking monkeys who see Jesus in toast, and then pause and ask, "Okay, but did the chef do this on purpose?" This is not a sin. Seeing patterns is normal. Getting them wrong is normal. What matters is that you can explain the difference between Oda planned this and Oda opportunistically grabbed this. Put your best argument in the comments, and if you disagree with my labels from earlier, good. Argue with me. Now, I need you to do one more mildly evil thing. Take this video and send it to that one friend in your server who screams he planned this from chapter 1 about every single panel. You know exactly who I mean. The Marineford screenshot lawyer, The SBS truther. Frame it as an intervention done with love. Hey, I promise this will give you better ammo. You are still allowed to worship Oda, you just have to use the correct category when you do it. This is fine. This is normal. We are helping. If you want more of this slightly unhinged court document approach to fandom problems, hit subscribe. I am going to keep doing this. We are going to run this same rigorous, petty, spreadsheet-brained method on other arcs, other mysteries, other Oda is a genius talking points until the discourse either improves or I fully lose my mind on camera. Dressrosa structure, Wano pacing, the Void Sentry as a pre-written endgame, all of it. And here's my actual challenge to you. Be the person in your circles who raises the bar on how people talk about foreshadowing and planning without turning into an insufferable know-it-all. Ask, what did the author know and when? Ask, is this foreshadowing, retrofit, or pre-writing? You do not have to win every argument. You just have to introduce the categories. So next time you see Luffy smiling, remember, you are looking at a dead man walking. And now, you also know exactly which storytelling tools killed him. I'll see you in the comments.